Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Access Blockbusters Pod, episode number 67. Guys, it is the pre-Oscar episode. It is also the pre-Daredevil Born Again episode, but not only those two things, because we have, well, I say this every week, but this week has been crazy. I mean, Kathleen Kennedy, what's going on with Lucasfilm? So tons of things to touch on here today. And yeah, I won't spend too much time on the intro. Guys, if you are watching or listening on the YouTube channel, thank you so much. Make sure to subscribe to the Access Blockbusters YouTube channel. Leave a like, leave a comment down below with your thoughts on the podcast. We will be doing, of course, our recap of the Oscars next week and our spoiler discussion of episodes 1 and 2 of Daredevil Born Again, and hopefully an immediate reaction as well. We'll see, fingers crossed, on Tuesday when that comes out. This episode will have my full Oscar predictions, though, as well, which is very exciting as well. In addition to that, guys, if you want to listen to the podcast in audio-only format, we do have that. That is going to be on Spotify, Apple Podcast, Overcast, all those great platforms. So if you want to listen to audio only, make sure to check it out over there and go leave a rating. Let me know what you think about the audio only platforms as well. That will do it for the intro. Quick intro. Let's get into the topics. Alrighty, everyone, let's start out the podcast with something that will hopefully bring you guys some joy, because this film, these series of films, bring me a lot of joy. Let's talk about Paddington in Peru. The Paddington series has quietly become one of the most successfully critically acclaimed series of movies in a long time. The first couple films approached 100% on Rotten Tomatoes. And this third film, even though Paul King, the director, was not returning to direct it, it looked like it had all the recipe, all the ingredients for a successful third film in the franchise. And we've also gotten confirmation from the director, I believe, that they are actively in development of the fourth film. And I think this is a series that could just go on and on and on. For those of you who remember reading when you were children, the Mary Poppins books, those books just went on for a long while. There were many of them, and just many adventures with these characters. And I feel like the Mary Poppins sort of vibe is what these Paddington movies evoke. The whimsy, the joy, the nurturing kindness, and just the genuine good characters that these films have, including, of course, Paddington himself. So I went out and saw Paddington in Peru a week late, admittedly, but I still wanted to talk about it here on the YouTube channel. We're going to be doing a non-spoiler and spoiler review. It's going to be, relatively quick. Admittedly, there's not a whole lot to spoil. Well, there are a couple things to spoil that I want to talk about later on. But, I wanted to, I put out these reviews for films that frankly are not as big as Captain America Brave New World or whatever, because I think that there are films that are worth seeing and worth talking about, And so I hope that you guys can go check out the first two films if you haven't already, but also you would be willing to check out the third film in theaters while it is still here. It released on the same day as Captain America Brave New World. So let's get into my non-spoiler thoughts for Paddington in Peru. First of all, it's an interesting film because it's different than the first two Paddington films because, well, it's in the name. Paddington is in Peru. If you've seen the trailers, you know that he travels to Peru for various reasons. So that is one key difference for the film. And I will say that it was a little bit jarring because the first two films were so London-centric, and it's about Paddington finding his home, being with his people. The second film was different from the first film, certainly, because, spoiler alert for that film, he was in prison for most of it, and then he gets out and all that stuff. But, I think it's interesting that Paddington is now taking a new adventure off into a different continent altogether, and so that definitely changes the style of the film, and certainly the tone. The tone of the film, while, yes, keeping the same sort of whimsy and mysteriousness, amongst some of the other side characters and whatnot, but also the joy with Paddington himself, who is, by the way, great. Brad Winshaw, I believe, is the voice actor, and he is just fantastic as always. The supporting cast. It's sad to see Sally Hawkins not return to play Mrs. Brown. Emily Mortimer steps into the role, and I have some issues with the characters of especially Mrs. Brown, but we'll talk about that I think a little more in the spoiler discussion. I think for the most part the side characters are there to serve their purposes, and they do a good job there. So anyways, going back to Paddington himself, he is in Peru, and it's more of an adventure style film, more of a search style film, which I know the first couple films, like it was about the map and the book and whatnot, and it was also kind of an adventure film. The first film was more with Nicole Kidman, and so it's a little different, right? It's a little bit tonally different. And I will say the first chunk of the movie, and there are portions throughout the movie that just feel a little slapstick and a little silly, which I know it's kind of ridiculous to say, because these Paddington films have always relied on that sort of slapstick nature, right? You have, the scene in the first movie with the tub, obviously, and the prison scenes and whatnot. So, I mean, yes, there is always physical comedy and physical humor in these films, but I think this film, more so than the other ones, relied a little bit more on visual gags and some of those things. But again, it's still a fun film, right? It's still fun, and it has that sense of adventure. It actually reminds me quite a bit thematically of another third film in a franchise. I want to see if you guys can guess that. Leave it in the comments down below, and then we'll get to it in the spoiler discussion. But thematically, the film is about searching for something, which I will not reveal in this review, in this portion of the review at least. But it's just as endearing as you remember. Basically, what it boils down to is if you enjoyed the first two films, I think that it's almost guaranteed you're going to enjoy this film. I don't know to what extent you will enjoy the movie. I think that for me, I really like the first two films, and I definitely like this third film, and I want to see them continue to make these movies. I think for me, being outside of London was the biggest thing that sort of put Paddington out of his element, both in the movie, but also for me as an audience member. And I think that, again, they do all the right things, they have all the right moments, and the ending is very sweet, and it's very lovely. But there are some very genuinely funny moments, and there are some very interesting side characters as well. And I think the plot itself is somewhat predictable, but also that's just the way that things go with these Paddington films. And I think that if you're looking for that same kind of joy and whimsy, that you found in the first two Paddington films, definitely you'll find it here, but perhaps not in the same dosages of marmalade that you found in the first two films, is my general assumption, although I could be wrong. Some of you guys might think this is the best out of the three. So those are my quick non-spoiler thoughts for Paddington in Peru. Really liked it. Genuinely was a good time, and it made my heart smile at the end, and really brought some tears to my eyes at the end of the film as well. Let's quickly get to my spoiler thoughts for Paddington in Peru. If you have not seen the film, just make sure to watch it, or save this segment for later, and then come back if you have seen the film, or if you don't care about spoilers. Let's continue on. So I was alluding to another franchise with a third film that felt very similar, and I was actually thinking about Kung Fu Panda. Kung Fu Panda, it was sort of the return home, right? So that they find the hidden village with Po and his father, and it felt kind of similar. El Dorado being the place where Paddington originally came from, which I thought was very sweet. And of course, the ending scene with Paddington and saying, "Can he return home?" to the Browns was adorable, and it was sweet, and it really genuinely brought a tear to my eye. It was great, and I think that is the Paddington kind of spirit, right? That's the closest it felt like to Paul King, who directed Paddington 1 and 2, and Wonka, that kind of style and that kind of heart. And I really, really enjoyed that. Going to really my biggest complaint, and I feel bad saying this because it's not like it's really anyone's fault. I know that Sally Hawkins didn't return for Paddington in Peru because she just felt like it was time to leave the character, and that's all well and good. And they replaced her with Emily Mortimer, who I remember from Mary Poppins Returns, I believe. But I think it's interesting because the ending and really the emotional crux of the movie. And actually, it's so interesting because there is a flashback to when Paddington was first discovered on the train station, and it is Sally Hawkins who is speaking there, but you don't see her face because, of course, they can't show her face because then it would confuse audience members who hadn't seen the previous two films, right? So you don't see her face. And it's so interesting because the emotional crux of the movie is really hinging on Mrs. Brown, whether she can let go of Paddington or not. And I think Emily Mortimer is a great actress, but I was missing the entire movie, the joyous, bouncy nature of Sally Hawkins' version of the character. Because I'm going to be honest, Emily Mortimer, I don't know if it was the direction or whatever it was, the acting choices, she played the version of Mrs. Brown much more subdued. And it felt like she had just less energetic than Sally Hawkins did. And even besides the point, even if Emily Mortimer was mimicking every single thing from Sally Hawkins in the first two films, it's just hard because you want the through line, right? You want to see in the flashback, at the very end of the movie when Paddington is deciding whether to stay or not, you want to see Sally Hawkins' face because that's the character that we've followed through the first three films. I'm really surprised, honestly, how much that stuck with me throughout the movie. It's like, it's a side character. It's not even, she's not even one of the main characters. She's not Paddington, right? But I really felt the absence there, and I thought that was kind of an interesting thing. And on top of that, like I said, Paddington being out of his element it was a little hard for me to get on board with, but eventually you kind of get on board with it. And again, overall, when he says, "Can I stay with you?" it was just that moment. It's that moment that you look for in these films. So I really enjoyed the movie, and for those of you who haven't seen it and are listening to the spoiler section, I don't know, maybe you guys love spoilers, which, okay, welcome. But I would still encourage you guys very much to see Paddington in Peru. Have you guys seen it? And what did you think about it? Let me know in the comments down below. Alrighty guys, well, Moon Knight is a character that seems like he's been utterly forgotten in the MCU, and that is along with a lot of other characters, let's be honest. The Eternals, where are they? She-Hulk, where is she? Scar, well, maybe we don't need to talk about Scar, but a lot of characters in the MCU, especially in the television side, seem like they've been forgotten about because Well, the MCU has been going through its own turmoils and struggles and upheavals and really a reimagining of how they look at television shows, hopefully for the better, right? We'll talk about Daredevil Born Again Season 2 and how that strategy is shifting to yearly television shows. But, in terms of the original wave of television that the MCU was producing, we had the first wave, right? This is pre-Endgame. They were planning out WandaVision and Loki and Falcon and the Winter Soldier and Hawkeye. That's the first wave, right? And then the second wave, you get your She-Hulks and Moon Knights and Miss Marvels and I think Ironhearts and Secret Invasions and Agatha All-Alongs. I think we're really part of that second wave of let's just content. Look, sometimes it works. Agatha All-Along, I think, was good. Sometimes it doesn't work as well. She-Hulk Attorney at Law, right? Moon Knight, I think, was very uneven. Sometimes it works, Miss Marvel, but sometimes it doesn't. Secret Invasion. So it's just been bumpy, right? It's just been bumpy. And so these characters, now the MCU is really almost oversaturated with all of these characters. And it makes you wonder because look, I think Moon Knight, if you want to go watch my rewatch video of Moon Knight, when I talk about the season after having rewatched it recently, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed a lot of concepts in it. But the execution, especially towards the end, was quite sloppy, in my opinion. So Moon Knight is a character, though, where you have Oscar Isaac, who is an Oscar caliber, no pun intended, Oscar caliber actor. He is so good, so good in everything he's done, even in X-Men Apocalypse. That makeup and the prosthetics and the costume, I think, is terrible, but I think he still did about as good of a job as he could have in X-Men Apocalypse. And so I would love to see him back in the MCU. And I think that a Midnight Suns movie is really what I've been clamoring for. Because, look, if you're going to have all these disparate characters, start tying them together, like Thunderbolts. Great idea. Tying together Taskmaster and Ghost and John Walker and, Yelena, all these different characters. It's great. That's a great idea. Let's do the same with Midnight Suns. You got your Avengers coming back. Let's start to at least get some cohesiveness, going forward. Multiverse Saga doesn't have to be good, but let's just make it better going into the Mutant Saga. Anyways, all that aside. Brad Winterbaum, who has been doing a lot of press in terms of talking about the future of the MCU and talking about what's going on after Daredevil Born Again Season 1 as he's promoting it. Brad Winterbaum is the head of Marvel's television and streaming divisions, has been doing interviews, like I said, and he gave this quote about Moon Knight and Moon Knight Season 2, which I think is disappointing on the one hand, but also intriguing on the other hand. So he says, and I'm going to read this quote out here. It's not super long, and then we'll talk about it. So he says, quote, "So I think Marvel television has happened in waves, and I think Moon Knight happened in a wave of shows that were going to establish characters that would fit or would tie into the future. And moving forward, our priorities have shifted. We're making shows that can exist as annual releases." We'll talk about that more a little bit later with Daredevil Born Again. Quote, "More like television. I would love to see a Moon Knight Season 2, but there are plans for Moon Knight down the road." So, according to Brad Winterbaum, who, again, I've said this before, right? When you have a Chris Evans or Andrew Garfield saying, no, I'm not going to be in Avengers Doomsday. No, I'm not going to be in, Spider-Man No Way Home. You don't really, I don't take that at face value because, again, these actors can lie. There's nothing stopping them from lying to the press about this. But when the executives come out and talk, I just think that I tend to believe them a little bit more because I think the incentive for them to just flat out lie to the media and not be trustworthy sources of information is much less. And look, they don't have to talk to the media as often as actors do. How often does Kevin Feige give sit-down interviews? Not that often, right? So when he says stuff, when Brad Winterbaum says stuff, Nate Moore, I tend to believe them a little bit more. And so when Brad Winterbaum says this, I tend to take him at face value of him saying that there are no plans for Moon Knight Season 2, which is disappointing because I think out of all of the shows, maybe Moon Knight was the one that should have benefited the most from a Season 2. Just like how Loki Season 1 really benefited from Season 2 being as good as it was, in my opinion. So that's disappointing. However, the flip side of that is that there seem like there are plans for Moon Knight moving forward in the MCU. And I feel like the only real avenue, maybe of course he shows up in Avengers Doomsday. Of course, maybe he shows up in Avengers Secret Wars, whatever. But I think really moving forward, Midnight Suns, right? Midnight Suns seems like a very, very intriguing possibility for the future of Moon Knight as a character. You have Oscar Isaac in the Disney family. He did Star Wars. I don't know if he enjoyed it very much. I don't think many of those main actors really had the best time with the sequel trilogy, filming it and whatnot. But you have him, with Moon Knight, he was willing to do it. He seemed like he gave it his all, and he's someone who gives it his all no matter what franchise he's in. Dune, Star Wars, X-Men, even Beyond the Spider-Verse, right? Or Across the Spider-Verse and presumably Beyond the Spider-Verse. So I think that, having him really connected to that Disney family, but also saying that there are plans for him gets me excited because hopefully we'll get to see him again in a team-up movie if that's what the insinuation is, or as part of the Avengers or whatnot, because I think that it would be a real shame to just have one season of Moon Knight just randomly floating around in the MCU's history and never see him again. So guys, what do you think about this? Do you think we'll get a Moon Knight Season 2 eventually? I think eventually we might. And where do you think he'll pop up next? Doomsday, Secret Wars, or Midnight Suns? Let me know in the comments down below. Okay, guys, I don't want to be a hater. I don't want to be a hater. And I've been making podcast episodes. You guys have probably been listening to me long enough to know that. I just that's not who I am. It's not who I want to be. So I just feel like I got to talk about this because I pick my segments, right? I pick things to talk about because they're interesting, because it's not just me saying, "Oh, breaking news, someone's been cast," but rather I want to have something to say about it, right? I usually, almost always, for those of you who've been paying attention to the segments, it's news, right? It's trailers, it's movies, but it's also I want to give some commentary. I want to hear what you guys have to think about it, all that kind of stuff. And I don't cover everything, right? A trailer would come out for something, and I'm like, yeah, I mean, if it looks fine, and if it's not for one of the big movies that we're all looking forward to, then I'm not going to talk about it. I'm not going to talk about every single trailer that ever comes out. So, I saw earlier this morning, as I'm recording this, I saw that a final trailer for the Minecraft movie, or a Minecraft movie, had come out. And, I mean, it's no secret. I've posted 2 videos on the channel talking about the first and the second trailer. I think those 2 trailers are 2 of the worst trailers I have ever seen in my entire life. And it's not like Andor Season 2, which we'll talk about that trailer in just a little bit, because, that's a little bit different to me in terms of I didn't like some of the things that the trailer did, but it didn't get me less excited about the show itself because it's more like trailer construction versus the content that's being shown. We'll talk about that more when we talk about the Andor Season 2 trailer. But, there's bad trailers that I just think are poorly constructed trailers that don't necessarily, say have any bearing on whether the movie is gonna be bad. I mean, it could be, but the content that you're watching on the screen is not the problem with the trailer. But then there are bad trailers that are bad because what you are watching from the movie look really bad. And I think that's what this is, right? The past 2 Minecraft trailers are just bad trailers to me because the movie itself looks, dare I say, almost unsalvageable. And again, I say this as somebody who hasn't even seen the movie, and for all I know, and I'm being dead serious, I'm not being funny, the Minecraft movie can come out in April, and it could come out with something like a 95% on Rotten Tomatoes, and everyone's like, this is the greatest movie ever made, take your kids to it, go watch it, it's heartbreaking, all that kind of stuff. Because, and I'm not just saying this because one example, this has happened many times before where movies that look terrible end up being really good, but the precedent, the Lego movie. I thought the Lego movie looked awful. I hated those trailers. And guess what? The Lego movie was reviewed really well. I went to go watch the Lego movie and I was stunned. It's awesome, no pun intended. It is awesome. So no, I have no doubt that the Minecraft movie could be a really good movie, and I hope it is. I hope it is. So it was with that mindset that I said, okay, 2 of the worst trailers I've ever seen. Let's go see what this third trailer has to say, and if it will change my mind. And I had the mentality, I just want to be clear, I'm not just going to make segments for the sake of making segments. If I thought that the third trailer was just okay, and it was whatever, and if it was pretty much the same as the first 2 trailers, I wasn't going to talk about it. Guys, this third trailer is probably somehow even worse than the first 2 trailers. And again, I don't think it's trailer construction or anything like that. I think the trailer construction is very conventional, the setup and whatnot. I just think that the more I see from this movie, the worse it looks. And I don't know how that's possible. First of all, the biggest question that I had from the first 2 trailers is why in the world are we attempting to put real people in this CG environment? And that's one thing, right? Because again, it doesn't matter how good the animation is. It doesn't matter how good the blue screen is. If you're just putting real people in this live action environment, real people in this animated environment, it's just not going to look right. And it doesn't look right. It looks like they're being photoshopped into the entire movie. Jack Black and Danielle Brooks and Jason Momoa. It just looks like they're being live photoshopped into this blue screen environment. Like as you're watching it, it almost looks like in real time there's a blue screen behind them, like a live stream. It's crazy. And again, I don't even say that as, I'm not saying that as a knock to the animators, because I just don't think there's any level of animation that could get it to look real or to look even semi-believable. So it's just not working. And on top of that, this is a world made out of cubes, right? And I've played my fair share of Minecraft, and so there's a charm to it, right? There really is when you're in the first person point of view, when you're playing with others, the kind of robotic animations, it harkens back to older games, right? With pixelations and whatnot. So to see real people roaming around, it's weird, and it doesn't look right. But then the second thing that I noticed even more in this trailer, more so than the first 2 trailers, and it was in the first 2 trailers, I just didn't really notice or just didn't pay attention, but it was so obvious here, especially with that with that joke at the end with the villager, with Jennifer Coolidge. That, I mean, they're not just, making the rest of the entities in the world, like the villagers or the wolves or the pandas or whatever. They're not making them blocky. They're not making them, full Minecraft. Because I think it's one thing if they just made everything else full Minecraft and then made Jason Momoa real human, right? I think that's one thing. But the live entities, like the mobs, right? The live mobs, are some crazy, creepy hybrid of like Halloween costumes where they look fake and they look real and it looks like a real person is in a Halloween costume. And it looks disturbing. It looks so strange. And the way that they're moving is like, everything about this movie is so questionable to me, right? Because, I mean, sure, Jack Black looks like he's having a great time. And I'm sitting here going, I'm all for trying new things. Like I said, Lego Movie proved that the concept is not really the point. It's the execution, right? And when they announced a Minecraft movie, I said, well, that wouldn't have been my first pick if someone had asked me what movie I wanted to see be made from an IP, a video game IP, let alone just any IP. It wouldn't have been my first choice, but you're going to do it, and there's a way in which you can do it really well. There are ways to make any concept really good. But guys, I don't know. Like, I have never seen a series of 3 trailers that has gotten me more and more and more concerned about a movie, to the point where now I would be shocked if the Minecraft movie opened with anything higher than a 15% on Rotten Tomatoes. And again, I don't want that, because what I want, right, come April 4th when this movie opens, and maybe even the few days before April 4th when the review embargo lifts, although for movies like this, if they're really bad, then the review embargo doesn't even open until the night before. But, when the review embargo lifts, I want nothing more than the critics to be like, go see this movie, you're going to be surprised, and then I'm going to go see the movie. I'm not going to go see the movie, guys, if it has a 15% on Rotten Tomatoes. I choose, it's a time commitment. Like, it just is a time commitment. I'm not obligated to review every movie, and I'm baffled. I'm just baffled. And I made this segment because I'm here to share my thoughts, but I also just really want to know your guys' thoughts. Again, I've played Minecraft. I know the game. I'm not a hardcore, I mean, again, no pun intended with the hardcore game mode, but like, I'm not a true, I haven't played, all the recent updates. It's been a while since I've played. But I couldn't imagine a worse way to make a movie based on Minecraft. So anyways, I want to ask you guys, because maybe I'm missing something, and maybe you guys are really excited for it. And if you are, that's awesome. That is truly, truly awesome. And I hope that this movie lives up to all your expectations, because it's certainly, from my perspective, yikes. So what do you guys think of this it's called the final trailer to the Minecraft movie. And I guess we'll have to wait and see how the movie does. Let me know in the comments down below. Alright guys, Shang-Chi 2 is a film that I desperately need right now. Every single day that this film is not entering production is another 2 or 3 years at least until we get Shang-Chi 2. And by the time it actually enters production, we won't be getting the film probably until 2028. Crazy, because Shang-Chi 1, while yes, I mean, it wasn't the most successful film in the MCU box office-wise, was really a film that harkened back to Phase 1, Phase 2, Phase 3 of the MCU, when it was really at its peak of making really, really solid origin story kind of films, right? And even this film wasn't really an origin story. It was just a solid introduction to the character of Shang-Chi. I love that movie. By the way, guys, for all the narrative about, the MCU was dead upon arrival, after Endgame and stuff like that, lest we forget, everyone loved WandaVision. Falcon and the Winter Soldier was decently well received. Loki people loved, even though not a big fan of Loki Season 1. Hawkeye people enjoyed. Eternals was the first big kind of moment. But Black Widow people were like, yeah, it's fine. And then people loved Shang-Chi. And of course people loved Spider-Man No Way Home. So, I mean, it took a while for the MCU to kind of get to the point where everyone was like, are we in trouble? But anyways, all that aside, Shang-Chi was part of that wave in Phase 4 where the very first chunk of films that it was like, yeah, we're gonna be heading towards a new future moving forward. And it looked like SIMU LIU'S Shang-Chi was going to be a big part of it. But then we haven't seen him at all since that point. So Shang-Chi 2 has been constantly referenced by these, by SIMU LIU and by Destin Daniel Cretton, the director of Shang-Chi 1, and they've been like, yep, we're going to make it, we're all going to do it, it's going to be fun, etc., etc. But nothing has happened. Nothing at all has happened. And we've been getting vague promises from SIMU LIU, and we're going to get a Shang-Chi 2 and whatnot. And then Destin Daniel Cretton, well, first of all, he was originally going to direct the Kang Dynasty, Avengers the Kang Dynasty, which I thought was a great idea, in terms of at least the director. And then, Kang Dynasty got scrapped because of Jonathan Majors, and now he's going to be directing Spider-Man 4, another massive movie in the MCU. And then, Spider-Man 4, so let's do the math, right? Spider-Man 4 comes out in 2026, which means he's going to be spending all of his energy from here on out basically directing Spider-Man 4. And then if he starts Shang-Chi 2 right after that, probably the earliest it can come out is 2028, right? Maybe late 2027. So we're not getting Shang-Chi 2 for at least 6 years after the first Shang-Chi. It's crazy. It's crazy. But anyways, in an interview for SIMU LIU'S new movie with Woody Harrelson, Last Breath, the one about divers, SIMU LIU was asked by an interview. They had a very fun back and forth about, okay, so is Spider-Man 4, Destin Daniel Cretton directing Spider-Man 4 going to affect Shang-Chi 2? And, Woody Harrelson and SIMU LIU had a great time kind of going back and forth, avoiding the question. And then SIMU LIU gave somewhat of an answer, although he joked about dodging the question at the end of it. So this is, there's a whole back and forth that goes on here. But this is what SIMU LIU said, quote, I don't think anything's been impacted, referring to the question of, is Destin Daniel Cretton directing Spider-Man 4 going to impact how late we're going to see Shang-Chi 2? So anyways, quote, I don't think anything's been impacted. I think I speak to Destin often, and there's nothing coming out of both of us but excitement to make this film, end quote. Okay, so look, this quote is both encouraging, but I would argue more discouraging, because encouraging, sure, he talks to Destin Daniel Cretton. He's like, yeah, we're going to make this movie. It's going to be exciting. We're both excited about it. Nothing in this quote indicates that they're even close to entering production of the movie. I'm sure SIMU LIU is just as disappointed as the rest of us because, he made a great MCU movie, and he hasn't been able to follow up with that character in a long time. Now, granted, I'm fairly sure he's going to show up in Avengers Doomsday and have a pretty sizable role in Secret Wars, of course, so that's exciting, right? We'll get to see him. And probably Shang-Chi 2 will deal with the ramifications of whatever happens after Secret Wars. That's all well and good. But, guys, not getting to see Shang-Chi for 5 years until Doomsday, and then not getting to see him in his own solo film for 7 years is crazy. And this quote, to me, doesn't indicate at all that they're close. To me, it still seems to indicate that they are, it's going to be that production timeline of Destin Daniel Cretton's going to finish Spider-Man 4 and then probably going right into Shang-Chi 2. And he has another film that he's working on for another franchise. I totally forget what it was, but it was another big franchise that he was going to work on that film as well. So again, Destin Daniel Cretton is not getting any less busy. Is Shang-Chi 2 going to happen with or without him? I don't know, because it seems like, they're very much tied at the hip, right? It seems like Shang-Chi 2 is very much, the fate of it is tied to whatever Destin Daniel Cretton wants to do, much like how Black Panther is tied to Ryan Coogler in that way, James Gunn, Guardians of the Galaxy. These directors have their own, the lock on the franchise, unlike the Thor films, for example. Until Taika Waititi did Thor: Love and Thunder, it was all different directors, right? So I'm disappointed. I'm just resigned to the fact that the earliest we'll see him is probably Doomsday, which, again, it's going to be great to see him again, and the 10 rings better be important, right? Even if they're not related to Kang, that was teased, and I hope that that's paid off. But, it's really just disappointing that we're not going to get another Shang-Chi sequel until, I don't know, long time. It's going to be a long time. So, guys, what do you think? When do you think we'll see a Shang-Chi 2? Do you think it'll be post-Secret Wars? Do you think there's any chance we'll get it pre-Secret Wars? Let me know in the comments down below. Alrighty, everyone. Well, Chris Pratt was last seen in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, and I think my assumption, along with most everyone's assumptions going into the project, was that would be the last time we'd see not just Chris Pratt as Star-Lord, but almost every single other Guardian of the Galaxy. Well, we've talked about this before. Not only did, most of the Guardians of the Galaxy members survive, all of them did. Every single one, including Rocket, who looked like it was going to die throughout the film, including Peter, who looked like it was going to die. He was going to die at the end of the film. Every single member of the Guardians of the Galaxy is still there. Now, doesn't necessarily mean, in fact, it practically is confirmed that most of these members are not going to return for future movies. We talked about the fact that Dave Bautista said he's done as Drax. But, well, we can all speculate that other characters of the, Guardians of the Galaxy, like Rocket and Groot, are obviously part of the new team, but what about Mantis, right? What about Nebula? They could all return in some capacity, even though it was not explicitly confirmed, and they were kind of given an ending to that, their characters. In a certain sense, I feel like it's still very open-ended, honestly. Iron Man threw his arc reactor into the ocean, and he came back right after that for Age of Ultron. So it's not, just because there's some definitive closure doesn't mean that these characters can't come back. But the one character where it's a little bit different is for Star-Lord. Because if you remember, at the end of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, usually every MCU movie has these, X character will return. For example, I guess, spoilers, although, we've talked about this, Captain America Brave New World at the end says, Captain America will return. Duh. And he's going to lead the Avengers, right? And in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, what did it say? The legendary Star-Lord will return. So, Chris Pratt, in a recent interview, said this, quote, for people who know the Marvel world, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 was the last time you saw Star-Lord in there. There was a promise that Star-Lord would return. All I can say is we will make good on that promise. So, there you have it. And this was on, by the way, I have to point this out because this is important. Honestly, this is more important than if Chris Pratt just came out and said this. This is more important if we were just speculating this randomly because, duh, it said it in the movie. But the thing is, he said this on Jimmy Kimmel Live. And for those of you who know the ins and outs of talk shows, and I don't know everything about the ins and outs of talk shows, but I do know enough to know that publicity, right? These people, these actors have publicity managers. They have, reps, right? They have people who are watching their every single word that they say in order to monitor them and make sure they're not spoiling things, that they're saying exactly what they want to, what the company, what the studio wants them to say, etc., etc. And for these kinds of shows, it's not like they just come out there and they just say whatever they want, because otherwise movies would have been spoiled on live television. And I mean, not live television, they can edit it out, but you know what I mean, right? Like things would happen that just are unplanned and it would be chaotic, right? So I think there's a very rigorous process to which, Marvel says stuff like, well, you can say this, you can't say this, to Chris Pratt. And then when they do those interviews and they do all that stuff with Jimmy Kimmel or Stephen Colbert or whatever, there's a very specific, strict, set of guidelines to what they can ask, what they can't ask. And even though it seems like they're bantering and it seems like, can I ask you about Star Lord? Can I ask you about Spider-Man 4? The answer is, it's been cleared. It's been vetted already. And so the fact that they're bringing it up here actually is more of an indication to me that he will be returning much sooner than not. Because otherwise, I might have been a little skeptical of like, well, he might return in Avengers, but probably in another separate project down the line, maybe a Star Lord TV show that has been rumored for a while. But I think, honestly, to me, and again, this is just my own speculation, right? Nothing confirmed. I think this confirms to me, though, that his next appearances will be in Avengers Doomsday and Secret Wars. Which, again, I don't think was guaranteed, because Avengers Doomsday and Secret Wars, we're not going to have, or maybe Secret Wars might, but Secret Wars, well, it's going to be dealing with variants and things like that. We could get variants of every single character we've ever known, even if it's, characters in the Guardians of the Galaxy roster that quote-unquote retired, right? We could be getting variants of all of them, but or a character like Star-Lord, the one that's on Earth with his grandfather, I believe, he could, he might have been able to show up in some future project way down the line. But I think this confirms to me that his next appearances will probably be in Avengers Doomsday and Avengers Secret Wars. And what role he will play, I have no idea. Who will recruit him? Maybe Sam Wilson will recruit him. How he knows he's on Earth, I have no idea. But I think that confirms that another member, to me at least, and again, confirm, I say that, facetiously, it's not absolutely set in stone, but I think that there will be a lot to discuss in that regard. So, what do you guys think of Chris Pratt's comments? Do you think that his next appearances will be in Avengers Doomsday and Secret Wars, or do you think it'll be earlier? Do you think it'll be later? Let me know in the comments down below. Alrighty, guys. Well, Brad Winterbaum, one of the heads of Marvel Television and Streaming, is the gift that keeps on giving, because during the Daredevil Born Again press tour, he's just been talking a lot about all sorts of MCU updates that probably would have been more exciting if Kevin Feige had gotten on stage in the future and just unleashed it all, But I guess, send out Brad Winterbaum to give quotes to Collider and Deadline and whatnot. I'm reading this from a Collider article. I don't know. He gave this article on comicbookmovie.com, actually, but I'm reading this article from Collider. Anyways, he's just been talking about a lot. A lot of segments in the past week or so have just been about comments that he's made about, Moon Knight and Hawkeye and Agatha and all these different things, and Daredevil Born Again Season 2, 3, so we'll talk about that a little bit later. It's interesting. And another interesting nugget that we talked about, and honestly, full transparency, I recorded my Daredevil Born Again hopes and predictions segment before this news came out, so one of my hopes and predictions kind of is wrong, kind of is right based on this news. It's about Punisher, surprise, surprise, because Brad Winterbaum confirmed that, quote, John Bernthal is working on a Punisher special presentation. So, for those of you who don't remember, these special presentations were these little things, like 45-minute long things that Marvel would do, not full shows or anything like that, not even a full movie, it's not even half of a movie, really, but just little, shorts, presentations. They're not shorts, right, but they're shorts. And the past two, the only two that Marvel has done have been the Guardians of the Galaxy Holiday Special, which I love, and Werewolf by Night, which I really quite like. So the special presentation format is interesting. I feel like it's not a great place to introduce new characters, honestly, because while I really like Werewolf by Night, the question always arises, well, if you introduce a random new character, you can introduce as many characters as you want in 45 minutes. Nova, right? Terror Inc., you can do whatever you want. You can do Strange Academy in 45 minutes. It doesn't matter. Is it the most productive use of time to just continue to fill up the universe with characters we don't know? Probably not. But I think, having characters that we haven't seen for a long time, or characters that deserve to have more screen time but just don't fit into their own shows, I think that's a perfect middle ground for these special presentations to come back. And I think, in that vein, while and again, I haven't seen all of the Punisher series, to be fair. I know it's really good and whatnot. Obviously, I've seen Daredevil season 2 and 3, and he was obviously a part of those. And I think, was he in season 3? I can't remember. Anyways, definitely season 2. That was his introduction. But, he's a really rich character with a tragic backstory. And to see more of him in a 45-minute little self-contained story, I think it's great. It's almost like it's just its own episode of television, you know? Whatever he does in Daredevil Born Again, great. This is probably going to take place, I would imagine, somewhere between Daredevil Born Again Season 1 and Season 2. So whatever happens there, that's probably what it is. Or maybe it's a flashback, you know, because we see him, I think, in prison in the Daredevil Born Again trailer. And so maybe it's just before, like how he got there or whatnot. But I think this is a perfect use of this format. And honestly, I would be so down to see more of these. Like, let's see a Moon Knight special presentation. Maybe you kind of can't go back, you know, from having their own show to doing a special presentation. But honestly, the Guardians of the Galaxy did a special presentation. So let's see Miss Marvel. If you're not going to do season 2, if you're not going to do season 2 of Moon Knight, let's see Moon Knight. Let's see the Eternals. Maybe an Eternal special presentation like Judgment Day would be really exciting. I think this is a great idea. I know that generally these do cost some money, and so Marvel isn't really making a whole lot of money off of this because it's a special presentation, and let's be honest, who's signing up for Disney Plus just for a special presentation? But still, I think it's a really good idea, and as fans, you know, as a fan of this property, as a fan of this character, I'm totally down for this, guys. I think this is a very exciting thing, because again, I think flooding the zone, right, with all of these television shows is maybe not the best idea, even if Punisher, you know, brought the whole creative team back, just kind of like they did with Daredevil Born Again. They retool it and whatnot and make it a part of the Netflix universe. Even then, just flooding the zone, I don't know if that's the wisest idea, but doing a special presentation, go for it. I think that's a great idea. So guys, what do you think of the news that the Punisher is getting his own special presentation and probably releasing within the next year or so? Let me know in the comments down below. Alrighty, everyone. Well, we are officially in Oscar season. We've been in Oscar season for a while, but the Oscars are just around the corner. So later on in this podcast, we will be doing the official Access Blockbusters Pod's Oscar predictions for 2025. But before we do that, I thought it would be fun because this is the first year where I've really made an effort before the Oscars happen to watch all of the Oscar movies that I can. Usually I'll, you know, see the Oscars and make some, I don't know, general predictions or whatever, but not really confidently, and then just kind of go into the Oscar season and enjoy it. And then, you know, after the fact, maybe I'll catch up on a few here and there. Usually a couple films that I'd seen are nominated for Oscars. And so, but this year is the first year that I really made an effort as the channel is continuing to grow. I thought it'd be a really fun thing too. Yes, we are Access Blockbusters. We're here to talk about all the biggest movies, but the Oscars arguably are one of the biggest events in the movie world. And so a lot of these films you may not have seen, and that's okay. You know, I'm one of those people who didn't really watch a lot of Oscar movies before. And again, I mean, you'll see from my rankings and my lists that, you know, my sensibilities are not the same as Oscar voters, are not the same as the general movie-going audience. You know, we're all individual, unique people who have things that they like and they don't like, and that's totally fine. So, anyways, we'll do our official predictions in just a bit, but because I watched these movies, I wanted to do a ranking. I thought it'd be fun to just share my own thoughts on all these Oscar movies. So what I have here is a list of 12 movies that I've seen that I would consider Oscar adjacent. 13 movies technically, but 2 of them I'm not going to rank. So and I'll give a couple of reasons why in just a second. But 13 movies that I would consider Oscar adjacent. I guess 14. It's kind of nebulous, but the ranking itself will have 11 movies, and I'll explain the movies that I'm not ranking for a couple of reasons. But anyways, yes, so this will have 11 movies on this list, and you'll notice that 11 is more than 10 because, you know, 10 movies is the amount of Best Picture nominees. The reason is because some of these movies have, you know, prominent actors in acting categories that got nominated, or were nominated in other categories, but were not nominated in Best Picture, so I still tried to watch those movies as well, and I will admit, I didn't get to everything. I really tried, and I didn't get to everything. So before we get into my personal rankings of these films, I'm just going to call them Oscar films. I want to explain what's on the list and what's not on the list. So number one, a couple films that aren't on the list: The Wild Robot and Inside Out 2. I mean, they're Oscar nominated. They're animated films. They're Oscar nominated. We'll talk about animated films as we do our Oscar predictions, but they're not on this list just because I think they don't. I wanted to do live action films in this category. It's an arbitrary distinction, I know, but I just for the sake of my own consistency. So Inside Out 2 and The Wild Robot are not going to be on this list. Films that I did not get to see. I did not get to see Flow, unfortunately. Just not enough time. I do want to see it, but there is that. And unfortunately, I really did try. I guess another film I didn't get to watch is A Different Man, which got nominated for a couple other Oscars. But the one that I really wanted to try to see before, and I just couldn't, was I'm Still Here. I know that people in the comments have been, you know, telling me, you got to see I'm Still Here. Fernanda Torres, she did a great job. I have no doubt that she did. I really have no doubt that she did. it's really hard in the United States for me to find it. It's all on pre-order right now, and it's really hard to find a platform where I can rent it and watch it. So unfortunately, just could not get around to watching I'm Still Here. But I did watch every single one of the other Oscar Best Picture nominees, and I also watched many of the other films that were nominated for acting categories. So we are going through these 11 films here, and I'm going to start at the bottom, and we're going to start at the top, and we're going to go to the top. And I just want to reiterate really quickly before we get into it, this is my personal list with my own personal sensibilities. I am not, going into it saying, oh, well, an X frame, an X scene, the exact immaculate nature of this picture and the color. No, it's just my list. It's what I like. It's my sensibilities. It's things that bother me, things that don't bother me in movies, and what I'm drawn to. And you'll see that going forward. So let's get it started here. Number 11, The Substance. And this is a film that your mileage is going to vary drastically. I am somebody who can admit full well the artistry and the message and the performances in The Substance and what it was going for. And I applaud it for going for that. This is not a movie for me at all. I could not watch half of it. I was covering my eyes. It was horrifying to me, and again, horrifying not in the way that it's terrible, it's cringy. No, it was just hard to look at for somebody like me who just hates body horror, hates medical things, all that kind of stuff. It was just hard to watch. So that's it. That's the only reason. The Substance, number 11. Number 10 is Emilia Perez, and I'm not here. I've said it before. I'm not here to go through all the drama that's going on here. I'm just talking about it as a movie, and as a movie, it's fine. It's okay. I think. Really, and this was well before all the drama with Carla Maria Gascon and all the stuff that's going on with Emilia Perez. And again, not here to talk about all that, but just as a movie on its own, I said this almost immediately after I finished watching the movie. This movie would have been maybe better if there was no music. And I'm not saying, well, I mean, there's the song that's become a meme. I'm sure you know what it is, but I mean, in general, right, on balance, I don't think the music was distractingly bad in Emilia Perez, but every single time there was music, it was almost like Joker 2, where I was like, what? But why couldn't this have just been dialogue? Or why, some of these things were expressed, already. Like, there was that scene where Emilia Perez was talking to her son, and her son was like, oh, you smell like my dad. And the whole thing was like, oh, and there's this whole song about it. And I'm like, well, that was implicit, that we know how the characters feel. So the movie's fine. It's whatever. It wasn't great in particular. It's whatever. And so I'm just putting it here at number 10. Coming at number 9 is Nickel Boys. Nickel Boys is a movie that I, again, applaud for the artistry. I think it's really unique with the first person point of view. It's based on a book. The author of that book, who I don't remember his name off the top of my head, but he wrote another book called Harlem Shuffle that I read a while ago. And so I'm familiar with his work. And I mean, I liked Nickel Boys. I think it was different, obviously, with the first person switching point of view. For those of you who haven't seen it, it's about two African American boys who are kind of sent to this institutional place that again, at the time, I think it's in the 70s. I want to say the 70s and is when this book takes place, or this movie takes place. Obviously not a great time. And so they learn to navigate this place, and they learn about the world and whether, to face the world with optimism or cynicism. And it's a good story. It is. It's just a little quiet and a little slow for me. And I think the first person point of view was good, but a little distracting towards the end. There is a twist at the end that I thought was well done, well executed, but again, at that point, I was like, yeah, this movie is okay. But again, I mean, at this point, these are really good movies, in my opinion, on balance at least. And so the latter half of this list, I'm not, when I'm ranking them towards the bottom, these are Oscar movies. And again, that doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to love all of them, but it means that these are generally not, it's not like I'm ranking the worst of the year. So yeah, Nickel Boys, I liked it, but maybe not the movie for me. Number 8 is Real Pain. Again, not a Best Picture nominee, but a film that has Oscar nominations all over, with Kieran Culkin and with Jesse Eisenberg with the screenplay. So Real Pain, I thought was good. I think it was a little not all over the place, but I think a little bit slow as well, but not slow in the same way as Nickel Boys was, because I think Nickel Boys was more contemplative, but I think that A Real Pain, was just kind of like, and we're going along, and you see that there is a tension between these two main characters, and it culminates in a big speech at the end with Jesse Eisenberg. But I think that it's just a quieter film in terms of its scope, and it's just really about two characters that are just dealing with stuff, and I think there is a lot of merit to that. But I also think that for me, just, I'm watching these two characters go through this, and I'm like, I can appreciate this a lot, but it's maybe just not the most engaging film for me personally. But again, I thought the writing was good, I thought the acting was good and everything, so appreciated the movie for that. Number 7 is Andor, and Andor is a film that, a lot of people have much higher on their list, and that's totally fine. I think that maybe it's because I knew to expect that this movie was just not going to be what people, what it was going to subvert my expectations, because I think a lot of the joy of the movie that a lot of critics got was that they thought they were going into a movie that was just a rom-com, right? It was, I met this Russian oligarch, and, he's going to take me in, and I'm going to get rich, and it's going to be a love story, and then there's going to be drama and whatnot. And it turned out to be very different, almost like a searching for this guy kind of movie with these with the henchmen. They're not henchmen, but the guards and whatnot. And there's a lot in here about socioeconomic class and status in society and whatnot. And so I think all of that is good. And I appreciate the movie, and it is entertaining, by the way. I think it got nominated for musical and comedy at the Golden Globes. I could be wrong. And people were like, is it a comedy? And out of this list, I will say I probably laughed the most in Andor, which I don't know if that's a reflection more on Andor or just the fact that Oscar movies are generally kind of sad movies. Because I laughed, I think, the most in Andor. I think there were a lot of funny moments and scenarios in there, obviously balancing the darker elements as well. And I think that it's solid. It's really solid. It's just maybe not my, cup of tea either. Like, it's not a film that I'm like, oh yeah, this is amazing, and all that kind of stuff. But I think a lot of other people appreciate it as well. And so I'm putting it at number 7. It's solid. It's very solid. Coming in at number 6 is A Complete Unknown. A Complete Unknown, the Bob Dylan biopic, is really carried on the shoulders of Timothée Chalamet. He is just so great as Bob Dylan. It's amazing what he can do in terms of his voice, in terms of his acting and whatnot. Musical biopics are interesting because they all kind of start to blend together at a certain point. Tortured Artist pushes everyone away that he loves, and then he goes in pursuit of the art and stuff like that. And to be fair, this one is really well done. James Mangold, Logan, Ford v Ferrari, amazing. He's going to do Swamp Thing. He's going to do, allegedly, Dawn of the Jedi. So, again, one of the great directors working today, and I think he did a great job. Really great job. This is an engaging movie about an artist who, again, is pursuing a dream that, a lot of other people, it's very countercultural in the 60s, with the kind of music that he wants to play, and he's at odds with Ed Norton, who I think Edward Norton, this is the best I've seen Edward Norton in a long time, and so I think that is really great as Pete Seeger, and so that is a really good thing. So yeah, this was a really entertaining movie, really, really well acted movie, really well directed movie, and there is that. Number 5, The Brutalist. I was stunned how engaged I was in a 3.5 hour movie. This movie, I will say, I think the first 2.5 hours are just humming, and you're engaged. There's tension, there's conflict, there's, it's a character study in this man, Laszlo, the architect, who is trying to live the American dream, but he's going through his own personal struggles, and there are things around him that are being pushed upon him, and other people around him that are, also trying to push their own views upon him. And it's a great story. I was so engaged with just this. It's such a simple concept of a guy building something, like an architect. But I was stunned at how engaged I was in the whole movie. And for those of you who have seen the movie, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. In the last 45 minutes or so, something happens that I think just makes the film immensely dark. And I was not a fan of that, because, again, I'm not saying films should not have dark subject material. I think by the 2 hour and 45 minute mark, the point has been made. I think that this guy is going through a lot, and he is struggling with a lot. And yeah, I mean, this moment at the end really propels him towards deterioration, mentally and physically and emotionally. But I think that it just kind of took the movie and shifted it to a level where I was not expecting, and I frankly did not enjoy, because it was just so heavy. And so I think that really kind of, bumps it down a couple notches for me. But again, I mean, for the most part, it's beautifully shot. It is so well acted. Adrian Brody, fantastic. Felicity Jones, fantastic. It's great. The directing, Brady Corbet, great. And yeah, I mean, I just have very, few bad things to say, other than maybe the last little chunk of time there. So number 5, The Brutalist. Number 4 is Conclave. Conclave I talked about in my Best of 2024 video segment. And you'll notice a lot of these films I watched in January 2025. That's why they're not on my Best of 2024 list. So unfortunately, just couldn't get around to watching them before making that list. But Conclave was one of those films that came out in November, I believe. And so I went to see it, and I loved it. Political, and not capital P political, although it is sort of capital P political, but also political in terms of the espionage kind of going on in the voting for the new pope and the vote getting and the corruption and power and faith and religion and a great character with Ralph Fiennes being the guy who's trying to hold it all together. Stanley Tucci is there, John Lithgow. It's great. Isabella Rossellini as well. It's fantastic. I love this movie, and this is, I think these the next four films are films I just outright loved. I love these four films. Coming in at number 3, Dune Part 2. Dune Part 2 is awesome. I mean, it's just awesome. And again, maybe the one knock I have for this film is just it doesn't feel complete. Like if Dune Part 1 and Dune Part 2 were somehow smushed together into a 6-hour epic, that might have been one of the most epic, best movies I'd ever seen. But, as it stands, Dune Part 2, it feels like very much a continuation of Dune Part 1, and that's fine. That's good, because it's fantastic. The visual, breathtaking nature of it, the mythology, the way that Timothée Chalamet elevates himself to be, the Lisan al-Gaib, right, from Paul Atreides. It is awesome, and the hand-to-hand combat, the Bene Gesserit, the Fremen, everything about this movie, it's so well executed, and I love it. So Dune Part 2 coming in at number 3. Now, there are 2 spots left, and you might be looking at a list of Oscar movies and going, well, I know one of them, and obviously you know one of them. But the other one might be surprising to you, and this is really a film that speaks to my own sensibilities. There are a couple films every year, because you can tell, I don't love every single Oscar movie that comes out every year, and nor should everyone, I think. I mean, I'd love for everyone to love every single movie that they watch, but I think, if you loved every single Oscar movie that ever came out every single year, I don't know. I mean, maybe that's just who you are, but for me, I just can't fathom that world because we love different things. We all enjoy different things. And some movies speak to me differently, on a deeper level. La La Land is one of them, right? La La Land became one of my favorite movies of all time when that came out. This past year, I got to see a film that was nominated for 2024, I believe, Past Lives. That was about a year ago it got nominated. That's a movie that spoke to me so deeply. I loved Past Lives. It became one of my favorite movies of 2023 that came out that year. Loved that movie. And number 2 is a movie that wasn't even nominated for Best Picture. And I'm kind of stunned. It wasn't nominated for Best Picture. Number 2 is Sing Sing. Sing Sing is a movie that I watched it and I go, sure, maybe this is a movie that just speaks to me more than most people in terms of I love movies that are hopeful. I love movies that dig deep and cut deep, but at the end of the movie, there is something to hope for, right? That's why, we won't go into this too much in this episode, but I watched Parasite, and yeah, I can appreciate the artistry and stuff like that, but Parasite to me felt very much like The Substance, in which I felt so disgusting at the end of Parasite because of just the message and what it was trying to say about people, and I just felt gross, and it's just not a movie for me. Sing Sing is the opposite. Sing Sing is a movie that has such hope and optimism and joy and goodness, and it's about the goodness of people, ultimately, and I loved that movie. It's so different, obviously, from a Dune Part 2 and from the movie that's at number 1 still. But it's a movie that Colman Domingo pours his heart out into. And we'll talk about my predictions for Best Actor. But, needless to say, I think his performance is fantastic. But at the end of the day, I watched this movie and I came out of it and I went, wow. It makes me feel better about being a human being. And it's told through the lens of this theater production, and it's not a very long movie, and ultimately the story itself is not too complicated. You can kind of see where it's going, but I think it's still a movie that spoke to me so deeply, and I loved it. I love this movie. So number 2 is Sing Sing, and I'm a little sad it didn't get nominated for Best Picture, honestly. But number 1, and it remains number 1, is Wicked. Wicked, and it's hard to explain for me. I'm somebody who grew up as playing musical instruments. I grew up, with music as a big part of my life. And it's hard for me to explain, but it just happens. I've seen Wicked twice now, and both times. It's not just a first time thing. It's not even what the words are expressing. It's just hearing the orchestral notes, hearing Cynthia Erivo not even sing words, just sing, And at the end, obviously, the orchestral notes are swelling, and the last 5 minutes, and there are just tears that are coming to my eyes. And it's not even emotional in that way. Like, it's not like the Inside Out 2 scene about anxiety where that makes me cry because, it's beautiful. But this is beautiful in a different way. This is beauty in a different way. I acknowledge that for me, this has a leg up because it's a musical and it's able to tap into that for me, that other side of me, the music side of me. On top of that, I think the movie itself is just fantastic. The character work, it's great, the production, the costumes, but the music and the story and Cynthia Erivo, Ariana Grande, everyone is great in the movie. And this is just a movie that I watch it and from beginning to end, I go, this is what is beautiful about art to me. And I know that, it's a big movie. I mean, it made over $700 million. And, how dare we crown a Best Picture winner that is also a big movie? And it's not going to win Best Picture. It's just not. But for me, I stand here and I say this is the best movie to me that I watched last year, maybe with the exception of Inside Out. And even then, I said Inside Out 2 was my favorite movie of 2024. I wake up every day, because I rewatched Wicked a couple weeks ago. I wake up every day and I just go, man, it could flip. Like, you ask me in 2 years what my favorite movie of 2024 is, and I might tell you Inside Out one day, and then the next day I might tell you Wicked. So it's just that good, in my opinion. So that is my list of the Oscar movies. Actually, I should mention, there is one movie that I also watched that I'm not going to rank here, and that is The Apprentice. I should have mentioned this up front. It's not me trying to hide it. I totally forgot. I should have mentioned this up front. But I also watched The Apprentice because, Sebastian Stan and Jeremy Strong are nominated, and I'm just not going to rank it because I think obvious reasons I'm not going to rank it. I will tell you, though, I'm not afraid to tell you, I like the movie. I thought it was a good movie. And I think Sebastian Stan and Jeremy Strong gave great performances. So yeah, I like the movie. But it just doesn't feel like, it's a good place for my channel to be ranking a movie like that. So anyways, there is that. Guys, that is my ranking of all the Oscar movies. Let me know what your ranking of all these Oscar movies and the other ones that you might have seen are in the comments down below. Alrighty guys, well this is it. This is our final, the official Access Blockbusters Pod Oscar predictions for 2025. I'm going to be running down not every single category, and I'll explain why in just a second, but most of the categories, and of course all the major categories, and giving my predictions for who I think is going to win, every single award. And of course, we're going to be doing a post-mortem. We're going to be doing just a comparison of how many I got right, how many I got wrong, what the surprises were and whatnot. I will be watching the Oscars, of course, and we will be discussing it further next week. But these are going to be our predictions. So settle in, guys. We are getting into it. And also, I want to preface this by saying I will give, of course, my predictions of who I think will win. But I also, just for fun, was watching the John Campea show, and he did this on his show, and I thought it would be fun to do. I'm going to give who I would want to win. I obviously just did, you can, earlier in the podcast, I did my personal ranking of a lot of these films. But just in terms of these individual categories, I thought it'd be fun to also chime in with who I think should win from my personal opinion. But again, that's just me. So let's get into it. I'm not going to do predictions for every single category. I'm also going to try to post these predictions, if I can remember, on the community tab so that they're there. You can see them and whatnot when this segment comes out. But yeah, guys, it will be a good time there. And the reason I'm not going to do every single category, like short documentary short or whatnot, is just because I haven't seen most of those documentary shorts or short films or whatnot, and so it just doesn't really make a whole lot of sense for me to be making a prediction there when I haven't seen the film. Okay. Without further ado, let's get into it. I'm going from not least important. I'm not going to say that there's a least important category, but just, we're going to build our way up to Best Picture. I think that is an appropriate way to do it there. So let's start out with original screenplay. I'm also just not going to read out every single nominee, although I will talk about, like I said, the one I think will win and the one I hope will win. So let's start out with original screenplay. And we have, my prediction is going to be A Real Pain. From Jesse Eisenberg. And I think that, there's a lot of momentum on Jesse Eisenberg's side here where I think that it makes sense that, he wrote a really good screenplay. And I think that just with I think it was the Critics' Choice Awards that he just won at, it feels like there's some momentum on his side here. And so I'm going to go with Jesse Eisenberg. My personal pick here, though, would just be The Brutalist, because I think The Brutalist was just a monumental feat in telling a 3.5-hour story, and I think that should be applauded. So I would go with The Brutalist there. But my pick here is going to be A Real Pain to win the award. Best Original Screenplay. My pick to win this award is going to be Conclave, and my hopes, or who I would pick, is also going to be Conclave. Love this film. I think all the momentum, is on its side, and I think that it makes a lot of sense here for it to take that award. I think it's won every single instance of Best Adapted Screenplays thus far, and I think that it will continue to do so at the Oscars. So there is that. Best Visual Effects. Now this one's interesting because I am going to go with my prediction of Dune Part 2, but I actually think Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes should win. And it's not that I don't think the visual effects in Dune Part 2 aren't amazing. They're incredible. I mean, my goodness, they're incredible. But I mean, the feat of having, and I think it's a volume, it's a quantity thing. It's quantity and quality for Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, because the CGI for those monkeys are incredible. It's unbelievable how realistic they've turned out to be. Proxima Caesar and I forget the name, Noah and all his friends, and it's incredible how photorealistic those visual effects have been. And then you add on the quantity. And I know that, again, in Dune Part 2, you have the sandworms and you have big visual effects and stuff like that. I get it. I totally do. But I mean, my gosh, with Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. So my personal pick would actually be Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, but I think Dune Part 2 is going to take this award home. So there is that. Next up, we have sound, best sound. And I'm going to pick Dune Part 2, and I'm going to agree that I think Dune Part 2 should win. Not a big surprise here to me. I think amongst these nominees, not a lot stands out. A complete unknown, it would be more so for music, I think, music mixing and whatnot. Emilia Perez, same. Wicked, same. Wild Robot. Wild Robot's interesting to me in this category. I think the sound is great. But I think this one is, it seems fairly obvious to me to be Dune Part 2. I could be just totally blindsided, by the way. But I think it's going to be Dune Part 2. Best production design. I'm going to go with Wicked as my prediction, and I'm also going to go with Wicked for my personal pick because did you see the movie? Even if you don't like the movie, look at the sets, look at all those things were built. Not all those things, but most of those things were actually built and at the very least scaffolded, and then blue screen was put behind it. So it's amazing, just what they were able to do with physical sets and also augmenting that with visual effects. It's incredible. Even if you don't like Wicked, I think you have to acknowledge that just the sheer breathtakingness of the production design of Wicked was definitely a feat to behold. So yes, there is that. Best original score. My prediction here is going to be The Brutalist. And honestly, out of these nominees, so we have The Brutalist, Conclave, Emilia Perez, Wicked, and The Wild Robot, I don't have a good sense of this category at all. This might be one of my more shaky ones. I'm going to go with The Brutalist as my prediction because I think The Brutalist has momentum on its side. But I might personally go with Wicked, even though I acknowledge that a lot of it is buoyed by the songs, the actual songs themselves. But this one is a weird one to me, because Conclave, the music didn't stand out a whole lot. Emilia Perez, music, aside from the musical numbers, didn't really stand out a whole lot. The Wild Robot, I think maybe has a fighting chance too in this category, but, I think The Brutalist, the music was, it fit the scene at the very least. I remember that, and so I feel not great about this category, but we'll have to see about that. So my pick will be The Brutalist for best original score. Best makeup and hairstyling. My prediction is going to be The Substance, and my personal pick would be The Substance. If you haven't seen The Substance and you don't know what it's about, maybe skip ahead 10 seconds. That monster design at the end and everything that Demi Moore's character is going through, Elizabeth is going through, is unreal what they were able to accomplish with makeup and hairstyling. It is crazy. So yeah, I think that one is a pretty big lock to win best makeup and hairstyling. Okay, next category is an interesting one, international feature film, because we have 2 Oscar-nominated films here, Best Picture-nominated films here, and I'm Still Here and Emilia Perez. And I'm only making a prediction here just based on what I've seen. I'm not going to make a personal pick here because, like I said, in my previous ranking of the Oscar film segment, I haven't seen I'm Still Here. I have seen Emilia Perez, but I think there is so much negative backlash with Emilia Perez that I think I'm Still Here is going to take this one. So that's just my prediction. I'm going to say I'm Still Here is going to take it just purely based on momentum and everything else that's going on around it. So that is my pick for best international feature film. Okay, next category up, I believe, is film editing. And film editing is also one I don't have a particularly good grasp on it because these nominees here, we have Anora, we have The Brutalist, Conclave, Emilia Perez, and Wicked. The film editing certainly didn't detract from it. I'm sure if you pointed out very specific things about where shots were composed and whatnot, I'd be able to be like, oh yes, amazing, all that kind of stuff. I don't actually have a good sense of what Oscar voters are looking for. So I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I'm going to say for both my predictions and my personal pick, I'm going to say Anora. I think Anora, it was a film of contrasts, right? What you were expecting with this love story, and then the subversion of expectation there. And I think that editing was a pretty important part of how you tell that story. Not to say that, The Brutalist, for example, it wasn't. I think that it's hard. It's really hard for me to understand what Oscar voters are looking for in this category. And so I just think that for me, when I look back on it, I think that when editing meant the most to me was probably in Anora. So I'm going to say Anora. Best costume design. I am going to go here with, I think, no big surprise, Wicked. And as my prediction and as my personal pick, I think that one is pretty self-explanatory. Very similar to my argument with the production design. Best cinematography is an interesting one because my prediction is going to be The Brutalist, but I feel very strongly that Dune Part 2 should win this award. I think The Brutalist just has too much of that Oscar momentum on its side that it's going to start just steamrolling and grabbing those awards. And I think people, to be fair, it is so beautifully shot. I'm not denying that. But Dune Part 2, my goodness. And this one is one where I would be so happy to be wrong. And Dune Part 2 takes the win here. And I don't think it's not a long shot. I think it's close enough to where I'm going, yeah, I mean, who knows, right? But I can't in good conscience say Dune Part 2 because I think that The Brutalist has too much momentum on its side for that category. So cinematography, I'm going to say, is going to be The Brutalist. Best animated feature film, Flow had a little bit of momentum early on, winning some of the earlier awards, I think Golden Globes and whatnot. But I think recently The Wild Robot has taken up that momentum. So my prediction is going to be The Wild Robot. My personal pick is Inside Out 2. I love The Wild Robot. Love The Wild Robot. But Inside Out 2 spoke to me just on a deeper level. And I love Inside Out 2 as well. But that one is also pretty close for me. And so I think, we'll have to see how that one shakes out. But I think The Wild Robot is gaining that momentum back. Okay, let's head into the final few categories here, the most important ones, arguably, for the Oscars. We're going to start out with actor in a supporting role. And my prediction here is I think this one is about as much of a lock as you can make it right now. It's going to be Kieran Culkin in A Real Pain. I think that is, I would be so stunned if someone else won that award. However, I would personally actually put my personal vote to Guy Pearce in The Brutalist. I think that Kieran Culkin did a great job in A Real Pain. I think it was a little more one note than the performance that Guy Pearce had to give in The Brutalist. I mean, The Brutalist, that character is all sorts of messed up. And I think that, he had to play a very specific character at some points, a very broad character at other points. And he impressed me the most. I think also, I was realizing as I was making my list that a lot of the reasons why I might default to The Brutalist is just because it's long. And I'm not saying that long films have better shots, but because long films have more opportunities to showcase their actors' talents and to showcase cinematography. And I think that this is an instance in which I think I got to see more of Guy Pearce, and I got to see him, really become a lot of different aspects of this character that he was playing in The Brutal. So I actually would go personally with Guy Pearce, but I think it's such a lock that Kieran Culkin wins for Best Supporting Actor. Best Actor. This one is obvious. This one is so obvious. It's going to be Adrien Brody. Again, Best Actor and Best Supporting Actor. I don't remember a recent Oscars where these the best acting categories were so locked up for actors, because I would be stunned if it's not Adrien Brody and Kieran Culkin. Adrien Brody he deserves it. He gave such a good performance in The Brutalist, and actually he is also my personal pick. So there you go. Best Supporting Actress. This one also I feel pretty good about. The acting categories this year just not super surprising, although we'll talk about the last one, which I think is probably the widest open. But Best Supporting Actress, I think Zoe Saldana, who yes, is in Emilia Perez, and yes, Emilia Perez is under fire, but it doesn't seem like it's affecting her at any of the other Oscar or any of the other award ceremonies, because she is coming out with wins after wins after wins, and so I think she is going to take Best Supporting Actress. But I actually, and this is stunning, if you had told me this a year ago, I would have said you're crazy. I would have given it to Ariana Grande. Out of these actresses, by the way, because look, they're all great actresses. They all gave great performances here, but out of the actresses on this list here, we have Monica Barbaro in A Complete Unknown, Ariana Grande in Wicked, Felicity Jones in The Brutalist, Isabella Rossellini, in Conclave, and Zoe Saldana and Emilia Perez. I think, honestly, the strongest performance to me was Ariana Grande. I think she really stood out to me as being so strong. And I don't know, maybe that's just because she surprised me the most, but I think that is probably going to be where my pick is going to be. And finally, we have Best Actress. This one's hard, because I don't know if Carla Sofia Gascon, I kept calling her Maria, my apologies, Carla Sofia Gascon. I don't know if she ever had a chance to win, even without all the controversy. She definitely doesn't have a chance here. I think Mikey Madison is the popular pick, and I think that, she has some momentum on her side here with Anora, but I think the amount of momentum that she's built up throughout this award season, first by becoming a surprise at the Golden Globes, and now coming into Oscar season, my personal pick and my predictions for who's going to win is going to be Demi Moore. I think the performance she gave is truly career defining. And I think Mikey Madison probably has the best argument to dethrone her for that, but I think that it's going to be Demi Moore. So that is my prediction there. All right, let's move on to the final two categories. We have Best Director. Best Director is also going to be an agreement for my personal pick and my predictions. It's going to be Brady Corbett for The Brutalist. This film is an achievement. It's just an achievement in filmmaking. It's amazing. I I don't know if I would have said something differently. Frankly, I might have said John M. Chu, for all I know, if he was nominated. And Denis Villeneuve certainly has an argument if he was nominated. It is unbelievable. I don't know. I mean, I definitely would have bumped out Emilia Perez for directing. This pains me. I probably would have bumped out Anora, Sean Baker, because these movies are just so well directed. But I would have bumped it out for Wicked as well. So Wicked and Dune Part 2 should have been in there, in my opinion. But anyways, that is how the chips fall. And I think that out of this list here, Brady Corbett, it was a masterpiece in terms of directing. So, Best Director. Finally, we get to Best Picture. I think my preferred pick is not a surprise. It's going to be Wicked, because we just talked about the fact that Wicked is my favorite movie of the Oscar-nominated movies of 2024, and certainly vying for just best overall in 2024 with films like Sing Sing and Inside Out 2, for sure. But I think Wicked has, very little chance of winning the award itself. And if you had asked me 3 weeks ago, who's going to win Best Picture, I would have said The Brutalist. It's easy, done. But I have to tell you, Anora is building momentum. It is building such rapid momentum heading into Oscar season. My prediction for Best Picture, and I can see it now. They're revealing the award, and they go Best Picture. The Best Motion Picture goes to The Brutalist. And I go, I should have picked The Brutalist. But my gut is telling me Anora. Honestly, I again could be very, very wrong about this, but I think Anora has that underdog energy going for it. It was one of the front runners early on, but it really got pushed aside as the Oscar race went on, and so we'll see where it lands from there. Guys, those are my complete Oscar predictions. I'm going to try to remember to post this before the Oscars on the community tab so you guys can see. And then, of course, we'll do a debrief and we'll talk about what actually happened at the Oscars in next week's episode. What are your predictions for the Oscar categories? Let me know in the comments down below. All right, guys, I know last week's episode was very, very Captain America Brave New World centric. I'm sure that the film will come up here and there in the future, but I think this will probably be, knock on wood, I don't know, maybe I'll have to record more segments for this podcast, but one of the last segments that we'll talk about Captain America Brave New World in a little bit, because we got Daredevil to look forward to, Thunderbolts to look forward to, and look, I like Captain America Brave New World. I think it's okay, right? I talked about that in my review. You can go check it out in previous episodes, and I did a revisited segment as well. But let's talk about the second weekend box office, because Captain America Brave New World, I usually don't talk about box office until it's all said and done, but this is alarming, and this is something that's worth talking about. So Captain America Brave New World, for those of you who remember, opened on February 14th to about $100 million, $95-ish million opening weekend. For context, and we talked about this before, that's not terrible. It's not obviously close to the top. I mean, the Avengers, films make $200 million, and Avengers Endgame made something like $357 million. It's crazy. It's a crazy amount of money domestically to make. But, some of the lower movies make about $120-ish million, and even lower films make $50 to $70, $80, $90 million. So it's not bad. It's not bad. It's not great. But, I've said this before, that even if Captain America Brave New World had all of the right things going for it within the same shell of the movie, and even if it was received with like a 90% Rotten Tomatoes score, it had headwinds, right? There are going to be some people who, rightly or wrongly, because there are really bad reasons for not wanting Captain America to be Sam Wilson, to be a black man, right? That just completely wrong reasons. But then there are also just people who are like, well, that's not Steve Rogers, and I grew up with Chris Evans, and I don't know. That guy's Falcon, right? And well, I personally have Captain America will always be firstly and foremostly associated to me as Steve Rogers, because that's just who I grew up with. I have very much accepted, this is Captain America now, and I think that Sam Wilson and Anthony Mackie did a great job in Falcon and the Winter Soldier and Captain America Brave New World, two projects that I didn't love, but I think he did a great job. Anyways, there are headwinds going for that. Also, the MCU is just in a decline. It is what it is. Hopefully it'll be on the upswing soon with Thunderbolts, Daredevil Born Again, and Fantastic Four coming up, with Avengers, Doomsday, and Secret Wars on the horizon, and Spider-Man 4. So we'll see. We'll see about that. But headwinds, right? So $100 million in a vacuum is not a bad thing opening weekend domestically. I said during my box office forecasting segments in the Access Blockbusters pod in previous episodes, and it seems like such a no-duh Captain Obvious thing to say, but I said then, and I think the data now proves it, what will determine Captain America's box office longevity is maybe less of anything else, except for the fact that, it's not that great. And I'm saying this more holistically. I'm not even saying this from my own personal experience. I'm saying this from a critical standpoint. The film has something like a 49 or a 50% on Rotten Tomatoes, people generally, and by people I mean critics and some audience members, are generally not as on board with the film as they used to be with other Marvel movies. So taking a look at these objective numbers, Captain America Brave New World took the third biggest opening weekend drop from weekend 1 to weekend 2. Why is this important? The opening weekend percentage drop, it needs a lot of context around it for those of you who haven't been following box office that much. Basically, the film makes the vast majority of its money domestically in the opening weekend. Makes sense, right? Because that's when most people want to see it. That's the excitement. And that's sort of pre-reviews making their way, pre-word of mouth, people saying, oh, it's not good. It is good. You should go check it out, right? That's sort of where the movie will make most of its money based on pure excitement. And yes, based on critical reaction as well. But it's really important actually to see how it does the second weekend, because that is really more of the word of mouth and how excited people are to see the movie, and how many people who didn't see the movie opening weekend want to see it for this, as soon as possible, and how many people who did see it opening weekend want to see the movie again, right? So generally speaking, the bigger the percentage drop, right, from opening weekend to second weekend, the less good it is. However, there are some exceptions to that, and actually the Marvel movies fall into that exception more often than not, because if you think about it, if a movie makes an astronomically large amount of money in opening weekend, and by that we mean something like 150 to anything higher than 150, 60, 70 million dollars, like, a lot of these Marvel movies make in the $200 million range, and that is a huge amount of money to make opening weekend. That is more than 85, 90, 95% of all movies make in their entire domestic run. That's a big amount of money, right? So, in that regard, if the percentage is big, like let's just say Avengers Endgame makes, or whatever, Avengers 6 or 7 makes $250 million opening weekend, and it takes a 60 to 70% drop. That's still close to $100 million the second weekend. And it doesn't mean that the movie is terrible. It could mean all sorts of things, right? It just means the opening weekend was so big. There's no possible way Avengers Endgame, couldn't have taken a big drop. I don't actually know the exact percentage of Avengers Endgame from weekend 1 to weekend 2. I do know that Spider-Man No Way Home took a massive drop in its first to second weekend. People love the film, but that movie made over $200 million opening weekend. So yes, bigger percentage, generally not a great thing. Bigger percentage drop from weekend 1 to weekend 2, but not the death knell, because, these Marvel movies make a ton of money. However, it's not necessary. It's not usually a good thing. So when Captain America Brave New World has the third biggest drop from opening weekend to second weekend, that's not a great thing, because Captain America Brave New World's opening weekend was not that high to begin with. It's the combination of those two factors that spell a lot of worrying things for its box office longevity. To put it into context, right, Captain America Brave New World comes ahead of the Marvels in terms of box office drop percentage. The Marvels, amazingly, this is astounding to me, because the Marvels made something like $50 or $60 million opening weekend, and it had a 78% drop from weekend 1 to weekend 2. That movie made barely $250 million, I believe. It's crazy. Again, that movie also had a lot of headwinds going against it, but the fact that also it had something like a 60% Rotten Tomatoes, it just wasn't received as well as people would have liked. Unsurprisingly, the next one up is Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania with a 69% drop from opening weekend to the second weekend. And that movie was also not received as well. And so, again, it's not great, because Captain America Brave New World has made about $289 million worldwide, which, again, for Marvel movies is not the highest, and it really needs to get going, because it has a production budget of about $180 million, and to break even, including advertising costs, including marketing, including theater cuts, it has to make about $450 to $500 million to break even. And I don't think it's going to get there. I think this movie optimistically will top out at $400 million. And that's not good. That's really not good. And for those of you who are thinking, well, but even the films like in the Infinity Saga, they didn't make a whole lot of money. Like Ant-Man and the Wasp didn't make a whole lot of money. You're forgetting, though, those movies were all uniformly well received. The lowest critically rated films in the MCU in the Infinity Saga, I think, were still in the low 70s in terms of Rotten Tomatoes score. I know Rotten Tomatoes is not perfect. It's not a perfect metric of success. But just as an example, Ant-Man and the Wasp, Incredible Hulk, which was one of the first films and also was one of the lower rated ones. But, other films, right? Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. These are films that still were in the 70s and 80s in terms of critical rating. It is insane. And so even though the MCU has not tanked in terms of having films like in the 20% range, the Kraven the Hunter range, or the Batman v Superman range, the lowest rated film is Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, I believe, with 43% on Rotten Tomatoes. And that just means less than half the critics liked it, and that's not awful. But It's certainly a step down in quality, and the numbers show it. But here is the good news. If there is a silver lining to this whole thing, Marvel can still come back. You know why? Because people still go to good movies. Case in point, the last MCU movie that came out was Deadpool and Wolverine. And that made over $1 billion because it was a good movie. It was well received. And lest you think, oh, well, Deadpool is so detached from the MCU that it doesn't matter, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 came out right after Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. It made almost $900 million because people liked the movie. If Thunderbolts comes out, and yes, there's no denying that if Thunderbolts had come out at a time when the MCU was thriving, it would definitely get a $100 million bump, $200 million bump, and who wouldn't want that, right? But if Thunderbolts comes out, it's rated really well, people really like the movie, it's going to make money. People just want to see good movies. And I that's what I said going into Captain America: Brave New World. The biggest factor going into how much money this movie is going to make is if it's good or not. And critics spoke, and they said they didn't really like it. So I'd be very curious to hear your guys' thoughts. Do you think that this is spelling disaster for the MCU in general, or do you think let's just stay the course and let's see where we go from here with Thunderbolts? Let me know in the comments down below. Alright guys, so we will talk later on in the podcast about my hopes and predictions for Daredevil Born Again Season 1, which is coming out next week. So excited for that. But before we get to that, Brad Winterbaum, who has been making a lot of comments recently as he is promoting Daredevil Born Again Season 1, has been revealing a lot about the future of the MCU and the future of MCU television. And he gave an interesting nugget here about Season 2, but not just Season 2 of Daredevil Born Again, but Seasons 3 and, to quote him, Season Infinity. Really, as long as this series can go on. I have some thoughts. It's not a very long quote, so we'll talk about it. But I have some thoughts, both good and bad. And as is usually the case, I like to look at things critically with the middle ground kind of lens. So let's take a look at this quote from Brad Winterbaum, the head of Marvel's television and streaming division. So this is what he has to say. Quote, "That is the plan. Season 2 will come out next year, being 2026. Quote, then hopefully Season 3 and Season Infinity after that. I think this would be extremely rich, and there are many stories to be told on the streets of New York." End quote. Okay, there is a surprising amount to dive into here. So first of all, let's take this, chunk by chunk. First chunk, that is the plan. Season 2 will come out next year. That's amazing. Daredevil Born Again is filming again right now. I think very soon actually, and they're going to be releasing in a year. Who knows if it's exactly a year, March 2026, or if it's maybe like October 2026. But still, a year and a half between seasons, that's really good for television these days. Not just MCU television, but just television these days. And they've talked about the fact, and we'll talk about this in just a second, about how they want to move towards more episodic television, or serialized television, in the sense of you want seasons pretty much every single year, and you want them to continue on in perpetuity for as long as they are viable. So that is alluding to the next part of the quote where he says, then hopefully Season 3 and Season Infinity after that. And he says, I think the world is extremely rich and there are many stories to be told on the streets of New York. But here is maybe my one hesitation with this going forward. Because look, I think it's fair to say that the MCU on Disney Plus and television has been, for whatever you want to say about the movies themselves, the television shows I think have been even more hit or miss, right? Love WandaVision, really like Hawkeye, like Miss Marvel, like Loki Season 2, liked Agatha, but the rest is middling to not great, right? For me at least, personally, that's my personal opinion. And, I think we're all looking forward to Daredevil Born Again, very much. I am very much looking forward to Daredevil Born Again, because it looks like they really did a retooling here and went back to the drawing board and took the right lessons away from it. I'm really hoping. Again, we'll talk about in a later segment my hopes and predictions for the upcoming season. So we'll see. We will see how it delivers. But this is perhaps my worry, because the MCU is operating in a shared cinematic universe, right? So again, I'm all for more seasons of television coming quicker, right? If you enjoy a series, you want another one. Like Penguin Season 2. Would be great to get it this year. It's not happening. It's probably not going to happen for a long time, right? Another series like Andor, it would have been great if we got Andor Season 2 a year later. It's not going to happen. It's going to come in between 3 years later, right? And I think that it's great to get seasons of television sooner, because that's just how television used to be. And it's going to keep the momentum going for as long as the seasons are viable. However, in the MCU, I wonder how they're going to weave together these interconnected stories if you are pumping out these seasons of television every single year. Because what that eventually means is that you'll have many, many shows coming out every single year. Like, if that's the plan, then sure, Daredevil Born Again will run maybe for the next 3 or 4 years. But then you want to do Hawkeye seasons for the next 3 or 4 years. Then you want to do, new television shows maybe. Or maybe you want to do, I don't know, Miss Marvel television shows for the next 3 or 4 years. And then you want to do, what else has come out? She-Hulk seasons for the next 3 or 4 years. And Moon Knight seasons for the next 3 or 4 years. And Werewolf by Night. So I wonder at what point they're going to shut it down, or at what point they're going to do new characters, or it's an interesting thing to think about the balance there, and not just the balance of what characters are going to be showing up, but also how they're going to interconnect the story of the MCU, because sure, you can self-isolate these stories for so long, but I mean, if you want to do stuff in Daredevil Born Again that really impacts the city of New York, and you want to do seasons of Daredevil Born Again every single year, but you also want to release a Spider-Man film that takes place in New York, how... When you're already struggling with the continuity so much, because let's face it, Marvel continuity is crazy right now. I mean, for example, Secret Invasion to the Marvels, right? Samuel L. Jackson's Nick Fury was not even acknowledged to be the same character. It's two completely different versions of that same character. But Marvel doesn't really seem to mind right now. And so I just wonder how they're going to be able to handle the continuity between all the shows and movies. It's all... The unfortunate thing is that it's all trial and error, right? Nobody's really explored this world of streaming and movies in the same cinematic universe. DC is also probably going to go through its own lessons learned and mistakes made and things like that before they get to a model that works. And by that point, maybe the whole television model upends itself again. So we'll have to see about that. But the good news out of this segment is that Daredevil Born Again Season 2 is coming out next year. Guys, what do you think about this news? And do you think that this model is sustainable to have seasons of Daredevil Born Again and other MCU television shows come out every single year? Let me know in the comments down below. All right, guys, we are so close. We're so close to the return of one of the most critically acclaimed projects that Star Wars has ever made. Not just including Disney Plus, in general, Andor. Andor Season 2, coming out, I believe, April 22nd, so in just over a month and a half. Andor Season 2 is going to be premiering. And we just got a new trailer for Andor. And this trailer is awful. It's terrible. This trailer is terrible. But everything we see in the trailer is really, really good. I know that's a weird thing to say. It's a very provocative thing to say because everyone, loves Andor and whatnot. And I'll explain my reasoning there. So again, I just to say, I hold these two things in contradiction, but I believe that these two things can be held together. The Andor trailer, like as a trailer, constructed, right, is terrible. But every shot, every piece of dialogue, every visual is so good. So Andor somehow managed to make a really bad trailer, but make me even more excited for Andor Season 2. Let me explain. For those of you who haven't seen the trailer, go check it out. It's pretty short. But first of all, what is this music choice? Why? I am a big proponent, because for those of you who haven't been watching the channel for a while, I actually haven't really talked about it that much in a long time, but I'm somebody who, in general, doesn't love pop music in movies. Obviously, it has a place in some movies, like Thor Ragnarok. I can get over it. It's exciting, right, with the Led Zeppelin playing. But generally, I don't love pop music because it just takes me out of the spectacle. And also, I'm a big, the orchestral music. Like, if pop music started playing in The Hobbit or The Lord of the Rings, it's like, oh man, what in the world? But Howard Shore's score is so beautiful and transporting and breathtaking that it's everything you could ever need. And so in general, even in movies, I'm just not a big fan of pop music unless it's diegetic, which diegetic music is basically in the scene itself, like a record player is playing, or it's, a radio, you see a radio and it's playing the music itself, not just random music popping up everywhere. I don't like it. And so to do it in a trailer like this, it just took me out of it completely, on top of the fact that this is Star Wars. Can you imagine in Star Wars, when a Earth-based song starts playing, it's so jarring. It's so jarring. I don't like it at all. Star Wars trailers in general, I think every single Star Wars trailer I've ever seen for any project in the Disney Plus era, in the old era, or the sequels, whatever, it's been orchestral scores. It's been dramatized versions of themes that we've heard from John Williams. It's been all of that. And this is jarring. I just really didn't like it. And on top of that, it's nail on the head. The revolution is starting. I'm like, of course the revolution is starting. We know that. The way that the trailer is edited, it's almost like, not slapstick in a way, but edited to be sort of spunky, like, hey, we are the rebels and we're going to get you and the Empire is going to... I'm like, come on. This is a show that is so serious and in a good way. It's so grounded and gritty. Then we're going to edit the trailer like this? Really? It doesn't make any sense to me at all. And the other thing that really bothered me is what's with all these quotes, right? Because honestly, for most movies, you only see quotes in trailers, and not even in trailers, like TV spots, when the movie is in its final marketing push. So it's like the week before the movie comes out or the TV show comes out, and the initial reviews have come out, and they're usually really good. Or even if they're generally not good, like Captain America: Brave New World will cherry pick the ones that are like exhilarating. Harrison Ford has never been better, whatnot. And even then, it's like, okay, well, we know you just cherry picked those reviews. Oh, we know Andor is good. I mean, you could have just said from Emmy Award or Emmy nominated, screenwriter Tony Gilroy, and the Emmy comes the sequel, to the Emmy nominated show in one of those transition black screens with the words that come up. Like, that's all you needed. Why did we need all these random quotes? It's so bizarre. The trailer construction for this, whoever made this trailer, it's like they never watched Star Wars before. And it sounds like I'm just ranting and raving, and it's like, get off my lawn kind of vibes. And I hope I'm not, because like I said earlier, everything that if you just take the individual shots, because I'm positive that the things that plague this trailer are not going to be a part of the show. If pop music starts playing in Andor Season 2, I don't even know what I'm going to do. But I'm positive that these things that I just didn't like about the trailer are not going to be in Andor at all. It's not even going to be a problem. It's not even going to be something you think about, because everything else you see from Andor, the groundedness, like being on the ground, right? And seeing the stormtroopers, and seeing the tactical gear, seeing Ben Mendelsohn's Krennic again, seeing K2SO, seeing Saw Gerrera, seeing Bix, seeing Andor, seeing Cassian. It's like, all of it is great. It's awesome. And also, on top of that, I think in this season we're going to see some more space fights, because the first season was pretty grounded. Everything was ground combat, but we're going to see some more space fights. We get to see those Imperial officers, that guy and the girl who are working on that espionage plot, and I think that's exciting. And we see the Death Star, the construction of the Death Star, which we were hinted at the towards the 3/4 mark of season 1 in the prison break. It's all exciting. Like, what we see objectively that's going to be playing out in the show itself is all super exciting. Again, I'm not somebody who thinks Andor is the greatest thing Star Wars has ever made. I like Andor. It's not personally for me in the sense of, it's not the kind of show that grips me and captivates me, and really endears itself to me. But it's a good show. I mean, I enjoyed it, and I might try to get to the season 1 beforehand, before season 2 comes out. So again, it's a really weird dichotomy, because I think the trailer construction, like I said many times, is terrible. But everything I saw from the trailer gets me more and more excited for Andor Season 2. Guys, what do you think of the trailer for Andor Season 2? That's one question. And are you excited for Andor Season 2? That's maybe even a separate question. Let me know in the comments down below. Alrighty, guys, we have waited a long time for this. Just around the corner. It is so incredibly hard to believe. We are getting essentially a 4th season of the Netflix Daredevil show. It is incredible, because I remember watching the first 3 seasons, not when they came out, but around 2019 or so, I caught up on Netflix and watched the first 2 seasons, watched The Defenders, and watched season 3. And I remember thinking to myself, oh my goodness, I can't wait for another season. It's going to be great. Only to find out the show had been canceled, along with everything else from Netflix. And yes, the MCU was moving on, the MCU was moving forward, but it was just really sad, because the Daredevil Netflix series was really the first TV show I'd watched. And granted, I didn't watch a whole lot of TV before then, but it was one of the first TV shows that I'd watched that I went, oh wow, this is really, really good TV. So it was a bummer, because I loved that show. I loved Daredevil, Kara and Foggy, obviously Kingpin and Daredevil's conflicts, Elektra, all the great stuff that they did in that show. I really, really enjoyed. But then come 2021, we had a little appearance from none other than Charlie Cox as Matt Murdock, and then he appeared again in She-Hulk Attorney at Law, which I really liked. For those of you who, didn't like the show, I didn't love the show, but I really liked his appearance in there. And of course, he appeared for a brief second in the Echo show in a very cool action scene, I will say. And so, all of that to be building up towards Daredevil Born Again, essentially the 4th season, which originally wasn't going to be. It was originally going to be a separate rebooted version where it was just going to be taking place in sort of a parallel MCU where Kingpin and Matt Murdock looked the same, played by the same actors, but it was going to be different. But then they decided, you know what, we're going to retool it. It's part of all the quality over quantity kind of measures that the MCU has been going through. I think really ending with Captain America: Brave New World and Daredevil Born Again, and of course Ironheart coming out later this year. And so now we're going to be getting a brand new Daredevil show that's going to be taking place in the MCU, but also going to be a continuation of the first 3 seasons, which is very exciting. So I thought, as we always like to do with the bigger shows and the bigger movies, I wanted to take a moment to do a predictions, hopes and predictions segment here on the podcast, just to talk about some things I am really hoping for. And I think if they can stick these things, then it has a very good chance of being a good show in my eyes. And then some predictions, some things that either will happen or won't happen. I'm usually 50-50 on them. Granted, I don't make the most outlandish predictions. Like for Captain America Brave New World, I wasn't like, oh yeah, Thor's going to show up. I mean, that's not going to happen. These are informed predictions, so usually I'm pretty 50-50 on them, and so we'll see how we go from there. So let's get into the hopes. I have 5 hopes here, and then I have 5 predictions. Let's start with the hopes. Number 1, don't let violence be the big sell. Put the characters first. Look, the Daredevil show is not for kids. The first 3 seasons, at least. And I don't think this season is going to be either. And by kids, I mean, young kids, because it's going to be violent. It's going to be brutal. In fact, the showrunner of this new iteration of Daredevil, even though it's a continuation of the Netflix show, his last name's Scartapane, basically said, yeah, this is going to be even more violent than the Netflix show. And what I'm doing right now, not necessarily just for the YouTube channel, but more for my own, refreshing and just wanting to see the old show again. I'm actually rewatching the Netflix show, and I'm trying to catch up, so watch seasons 1 through 3 by the time season 4 or Daredevil Born Again ends, and so hopefully I'll get a better picture of the whole story going forward. But anyways, so the thing about that show is, yeah, it's incredibly violent. I mean, there is a lot of blood and gore and whatnot, but it never felt like violence was the sell of that show, right? If that makes sense. It feels weird to say because violence, yes, is a big part of the show, but it never felt like it was the big draw. Scartapane's comments, the showrunner of the new iteration, seem to indicate that violence is really the big sell of this new season. He's like, yeah, it's going to be the most violent thing that's ever, we've ever done. It's even more violent than the Netflix show. And, I mean, I don't know. People have different tolerances to violence in media. I'm personally a little more okay, being able to, not okay with violence, obviously, but being able to disassociate so that watching a film like Logan, for example, it's more about the character work and the story for me. There are some things I just can't watch, and there are some things that are really hard to watch for me. But, I'm never a fan of gratuitous violence. It's just gross, and it doesn't make me feel good. And so if that is really the sell, and that you're putting the characters on the back burner because of that, then I don't think that's a good thing. So I really will hope that the violence is, sure, keep the DNA of the original Daredevil, be gritty and street level, but keep the characters first. Second thing, this leads into the second thing. Second hope, it's all about the supporting cast. And I actually put this hope here after seeing the first couple episodes of season 1 and being reminded of that. The reason that Daredevil works as a show so well is, yes, Charlie Cox is amazing as Daredevil, and yes, Vincent D'Onofrio is great as Kingpin, but it's the supporting cast. And that's why it was such a great move to bring back Deborah Ann Woll and Eldon Henson as Karen and Foggy, and also you have John Bernthal back as Punisher. I wonder if Rosario Dawson, I don't actually remember. Honestly, does she die in the original series? I've seen the show, I just don't remember off the top of my head, but if she hasn't, maybe we'll see Rosario Dawson back again. She's obviously in the Disney family as Ahsoka. So again, it's about the supporting cast. The supporting cast is great in the Daredevil shows. Elektra was awesome. Vanessa Fisk, who's coming back in this new iteration, is great. So really, it's going to be, yes, it's going to be about the main characters, but it's also going to be, let's make sure the supporting characters are a big part of the show and not just cast aside as well. Number 3, third hope, Kingpin and Daredevil stay at odds. It seems like from the promotional material, and it seems like from the clips and things like that they're on a little more of a cordial terms, maybe, enough to sit down together at a coffee shop and talk about things, even though obviously there's a lot of tension in that scene. And I think that that's fine. I'm not saying that Kingpin and Daredevil always have to be fighting every single time they see each other. In fact, I think that the showrunner said something to the effect of, well, yeah, if they're always in a room together, we want to make sure, maybe it's Vincent D'Onofrio actually, he was like, yeah, we want it to be so charged that every single time they're in the same room together, they have to be basically trying to end each other, because that's just how intense their animosity is towards one another. And I think that that's good. Keep it at, high octane tension and make sure that they're at odds. Because what I really don't want out of these two characters, it's not like Thor and Loki, right? I don't want them teaming up, And maybe there's a way that they do it and I go, oh, okay, really good, makes sense. Maybe. I'm open to that possibility, very much open to that possibility. But, I really would much rather have them, they can be on uneasy terms, right, uneasy ground, but still kind of have a mutual understanding of one another while still being at odds. And I think that you still want to build up towards some kind of animosity towards one another. So that's hope number 3. Hope number 4, Matt Murdock is just as important as Daredevil. Again, this kind of goes back to the themes of violence and the themes of characters, but one of the things that's so great about the original series, and one of the things I hope they really carry on into this show, is not just having Matt Murdock be in Daredevil costume the whole time, flipping around and doing somersaults and stuff. Because look, I loved Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man, I really liked it, but that cameo from Daredevil was just like, hey, Daredevil's here, and it was awesome, it was great. But I don't want this whole show to just be, hey, Daredevil's here, he's fighting people, he's doing a bunch of stuff, he looks cool in his costume, all that good stuff. I don't want that to happen. Matt Murdock is I would argue more important than Daredevil as a character. Not saying that this whole show, because one of the things that we heard from the original cuts before they retooled the entire show was that the original cuts of Daredevil, Born Again, the show, was that Daredevil was basically non-existent in the first half of the show, and that's not a good thing. I mean, you don't want Daredevil just to not show up, right? I mean, again, watching the first couple episodes of season 1 of Daredevil, Daredevil is there. Like, he's not wearing his costume, he has that rudimentary mask over his face, but he's there. Right, and he's a big part of the show. So I think that just keeping that balance and making sure Matt Murdock, his Catholicism, his faith, his sense of justice, retribution, all these different things, his blindness and his superpowers, his super abilities, all that goes to making the show really good. That's hope number 4. Hope number 5 is show how Daredevil fits into the New York City, and by Daredevil I mean the show in general, but also the character. Show how he fits into the New York City of the MCU. This is a different New York City because, sure, you can now retroactively say, oh yeah, when they talk about the incident in the Netflix series, that really is definitively, 2012, right? For after the Avengers. And that's good. But this is going to now be more explicitly connected to the MCU. And I want to see, what other street level heroes, because this is now a world where many, many metahumans and superheroes are running around. And I'm not saying that Daredevil should interact with every single MCU. Like, he shouldn't be running around with Moon Knight and She-Hulk and Ms. Marvel and Captain America. And no, I'm just saying that he should, be living in a world that acknowledges the state of the MCU, that it's a mess, it's chaotic, the world is crumbling around them, which, by the way, maybe makes it rife for Doctor Doom to show up and take over the world. But the world is a very unstable place. New York is a very dangerous place, or whatever they're going to do. Right? Make sure that you acknowledge the fact that there are street-level heroes operating now. There was a big thing in New York City with Kingpin, right? Acknowledge what happened in Hawkeye, just briefly if you have to, or Echo, or whatever. Just make sure that things are being acknowledged and just, fit into the MCU. It's now an MCU show, and I hope that he can take advantage of that. So those are my 5 hopes. Now, 5 predictions very quickly, and then we will wrap this segment up. Number 1, Spider-Man will be referenced. I don't think he's going to show up. I really don't think he's going to show up. But I think that, going to that last hope, I think that if you're going to talk about how the New York City of the MCU has changed, I think you got to talk about this vigilante who we can't get his identity, but he's crawling around, he's fighting crime, and we got to stop him. So I think Spider-Man will be referenced. Second prediction: the show will end with a hint towards Devil's Reign, which is a very famous comic book storyline which is a very crossover kind of event with Daredevil, or a New York / street level crossover event as well. So it's going to hint towards something that will probably come up after Daredevil Born Again season 2 and after Avengers Secret Wars, but I think that that's something that we're going to be building towards as well. So that is that. Number 3, Kingpin, on a related note, is going to be the big bad of the street level MCU. Love this idea. I think Vincent D'Onofrio is going to do a great thing. I was a big fan, honestly, at one point of splitting out the MCU a little bit more explicitly into MCU Cosmic, MCU Street Level, MCU Magic, and what Mystic, and whatever. Because I think it just kind of helps, know which characters are going to show up in which corners of the MCU. Well, also, yes, having the big Avengers crossovers. And so I think, having Spider-Man, Daredevil, even Moon Knight can show up if he wants to. But just, street level, right? Street level, I think would be really fun. And I think Kingpin is going to be set up to be a very big bad. Like him in the next phase, and then whatever you want to do with the X-Men, if you want to do Apocalypse, or if you want to do Mr. Sinister, whatever you want to do. But I think Kingpin is going to be a part of that. So there is that. Number 4, Punisher will be set up to get his own series again. Pretty self-explanatory. I think that, they're going to want to launch that after this show. And number 5, the saddest one of them all. I didn't want to put it here because, honestly, I just don't want it to happen. I think one of Karen or Foggy is going to die. I do. I think that if we're going darker, which it seems like the showrunner is hinting towards, then yeah, I do think that Karen or Foggy, it's going to be one of the motivating factors, either at the end of season 1, leading into season 2, or midway through season 1, and it's going to be devastating, and I hope that it doesn't happen, because I love those 2 characters, but I think that I have a sneaking suspicion that this season it's going to happen. So we will see about that. Guys, those are my hopes and predictions for Daredevil Born Again. We will be doing, just like we did with Skeleton Crew, The Penguin, and all these other shows, we're going to be doing spoiler discussions every week and talking about Daredevil Born Again. So get ready for that on the channel. We'll try to do immediate reactions as we can as well. And yeah, guys, look forward to that. What do you think about these hopes and predictions, and what are your own hopes and predictions for the show? Let me know in the comments down below. Alrighty, guys, full transparency. This is actually the second time I'm recording this segment, because I recorded the segment first when the initial news dropped. And for those of you who have been following the story, you guys probably know what I'm talking about. But then a couple more updates came out later on in the week, and I decided it would be best to just, give a more comprehensive picture of what's going on. I don't think the second interview with Kathleen Kennedy, or I should say the second wave of news with the interview with Kathleen Kennedy, substantially changed my thoughts on the whole situation. And really, I think the interview with Kathleen Kennedy more so was her saying, or giving clarification, rather than her saying, no, that's not happening. But we'll talk about that in just a second. So For those of you who have been following the saga of Star Wars, first of all, just for major background context, in 2014, I want to say, or maybe 2012, I think 2012 was when Lucasfilm was officially sold to Disney. And that's when George Lucas said, I'm done. And he was like, here, have Star Wars, I'm gone. But an interesting thing he did was appoint his successor, because his successor would be the person running Lucasfilm, running the movies, and then eventually the television shows and whatnot. And the person he picked was longtime Hollywood producer, legendary Hollywood producer, who worked with Steven Spielberg, extensively, and Steven Spielberg and George Lucas are good friends, but she has produced some of the greatest films of all time, and that would be Kathleen Kennedy. So she took over Lucasfilm. She revived the Star Wars franchise by launching the sequel trilogy. Force Awakens made over $2 billion. Rogue One made $1 billion. Last Jedi made $1 billion, but was divisive. And then we get into the Solos, The Rise of Skywalkers. And then by that point, we launched Mandalorian, which was very successful on Disney+. But then it just starts to spiral into some kind of mediocrity. And I maintain that as we look at the tenure of Kathleen Kennedy, and it will come to an end, regardless of if it's this year or next year or in 10 years or whatever. It will come to an end, as all things do. As we look at the tenure of Kathleen Kennedy, as we sit here in February or March of 2025, depending on when you're listening to this, I guess it would be March when it's coming out. I'm recording this in February, but in March. Anyways, when we think about the tenure of Kathleen Kennedy, I think that there is first of all, there's a group of people who just want to hate on her. There's such vitriol and anger and hatred, and in my opinion, there's just no place for any of that kind of behavior. It's just really breaking down a person because they did something that you didn't like. And that is what it is. That's life. People do things you don't like, and it's not pleasant, right? Like if a Star Wars movie came out that personally, really cut to the core for me, and I just so disappointed me and that's what Last Jedi was for some people. And I totally understand that. I'm somebody who loves Last Jedi, but I totally get that. I would be disappointed. But then to turn that anger and hatred towards Kathleen Kennedy, towards a human being, is just, to me, it's unacceptable. So there's that group of people. But there's the other group of people that I would also push back on a little bit. That says Kathleen Kennedy, and again, not being hateful, but would say Kathleen Kennedy's tenure at Lucasfilm is an abject failure. And I tend to push back on that because, like I just gave the context for, the movies themselves have been very successful for the most part. Monetarily, except for Solo. Solo is a glaring hole in that. But yes, monetarily, they have been. But if you want to look past the money, critically, Force Awakens was received pretty well. Rogue One, very well. And everyone seems to want to revise history. The Last Jedi, critically, because it's one thing, and we can talk about her failures to unite the fandom and whatnot and whatever. Critically, The Last Jedi was received very well. Rise of Skywalker, not so much. Solo, pretty well. So, and The Mandalorian, and she had some other successes like Andor, obviously. I think Skeleton Crew, which again, if we're gonna criticize her, we're gonna give her praise as well. Skeleton Crew was a huge success. But of course, Obi-Wan, Book of Boba Fett, The Acolyte, and yes, Rise of Skywalker and Solo. Things have not been smooth. So earlier in the week, it was reported that Kathleen Kennedy would be stepping down, or rather would be retiring at the end of this year. And the assumption, obviously, is retiring from Lucasfilm. And in that article, it was a reporter who got it from a source, and then all the major outlets broke that story and said, yep, that's what's going to happen. Kathleen Kennedy is looking to retire at the end of 2025. And at the time, I think we all conflated two things: Kathleen Kennedy retiring and Kathleen Kennedy stepping down from Lucasfilm. Because those two things, it's like if Kathleen Kennedy retires, she steps down from Lucasfilm. But if she steps down from Lucasfilm, I don't think a lot of us considered the idea that she wouldn't be retiring. So that was the original news. That was the original segment, right? That was what I originally talked about. But then, later on in the week, Kathleen Kennedy actually gave an interview with Deadline where she actually talked about it. And the interviewer straight up asked her, are you going to retire? And she said, I'm not going to retire. So I've read through the interview, and it's interesting because it seems very PR speak in some senses, but it also seems very honest in others. And so it's hard for me to parse through what she's just saying to kind of quell the storm of media and all these things that are coming out about Kathleen Kennedy retiring, who's her replacement going to be? Because she was very honest, too, about the fact that they have been making a succession plan for who's going to take over her position, who's going to take over the role of head of Lucasfilm for a few years now. And she says she's been in lockstep with Bob Iger and Alan Horn in that regard. So when asked about the succession plan, she says, yes, that's very much up in the air. But when asked if she's going to retire, she said, it's my decision. I'm going to do it when I'm going to do it. And I believe the interviewer asked her, could that be this year? To which she responded, it's up to me. It's my decision. And what she did say, I believe, is that while, stepping down from Lucasfilm, whatnot, she said, I think pretty emphatically, she's not retiring. Because her job, first and foremost, before being president of Lucasfilm, was producing movies. And if that's what she loves to do, and if that's what she wants to continue to do, then more power to her. And so I think, right, because originally, again, I just wanted to re-record this to bring more clarity to the situation. But I think my original analysis, my original takes on this, when this news first came out, still stands. I don't think this really, takes the wind out of the sails of the idea that whoever replaces Kathleen Kennedy, it could happen, or at least the announcement could happen this year, and the plans could be set in motion at the end of this year, right? I think what she's saying is, I'm not leaving, right? Because I think it's fair to say, when you look at that kind of news, those kinds of headlines that are coming out about you and whatnot, you want to set the record straight. You want to be like, look, I'm not retiring. I'm not done. But again, she was very honest in saying we have a succession plan in place. So do I think that Kathleen Kennedy is going to step down at the end of this year? I don't know. But I do think that the plans are in motion, and she's confirmed as much in those interviews. Whoever it's going to be, I feel like it's not a great exercise for us to speculate, because honestly, the best thing might be for it to be just someone unknown. Who knew about Peter Safran before he took over on the business side? Because Kathleen Kennedy is not the creative head of Lucasfilm. She's the business head of Lucasfilm. And she makes creative decisions in terms of greenlighting projects, but she's not like James Gunn. So who heard of, Peter Safran? Who heard of Kevin Feige before the MCU started? So I think, honestly, the idea of Dave Filoni or Jon Favreau, creative heads, maybe. But in general, I don't know. I don't think so. So we'll have to see how this situation evolves, but I think it's an interesting one, and I think we'll be looking for this towards the end of the year. Guys, what do you think about this whole situation? Do you think Kathleen Kennedy is going to retire at the end of this year? And by retire, I should say, because using her words, is she going to step down from Lucasfilm at the end of this year, or do you think that she's going to continue staying on through the next year or so? Let me know in the comments down below. All right, guys, well, buckle in, because this is going to be a pretty massive update on the DCU. You guys know I only talk about things when usually they come from these reputable sources, or they come from the actual first-hand sources themselves. And we have no better example of a first-hand source than James Gunn and Peter Safran, the co-CEOs of DC, giving an update on basically every single project in active development in DC. It's a lot. I was not prepared for this. There's a Deadline article that this is all coming from, and literally it's a rundown of every single project with quotes from these two co-CEOs. So we're going to dive in to this article. We're going to talk about most of it in, again, not going to read it verbatim, but we're going to kind of go through each paragraph, go through each project, and I'll give my quick thoughts after each one. But guys, this is going to be, it's a deep dive. It's an update onto the state of the DCU. And I think that there are some things that are exciting and some things that are like, oh, it's kind of a bummer. So let's get into it. So the article starts out here saying it's been 2 years since James Gunn and Peter Safran announced their plans for a Gods and Monsters slate chapter. That's what they were going to call it. And they have, they have plans to release 2 live action and 1 animated DC film per year, and also 2 live action and 2 animated series for Max per year. That's a lot. That is a lot of stuff going on. So that's interesting there. And also, wondering if they're going to include, because it doesn't really mention it here, if they're including stuff like the Batman Part 2 as a live action film when it's not really part of the DCU. Probably, I would guess, because they, this rundown here includes the Batman Part 2 and other projects that are DCU adjacent in this rundown. So I would assume that is the case. So then we have a quote here from Peter Safran. He says, quote, "We've unified the brand, greenlit 5 theatrical films, made 3 live-action series, and are producing 5 animated series. We've also acquired and distributed a BAFTA and PGA winning documentary referring to Super/Man, the Christopher Reeves documentary." So that's exciting. It's quite exciting. The article goes on to talk about the past of the DC brand with the DC EU, and then also the TV shows on the CW. And then, Peter Safran gives an update and then just talks about how they're unifying the brand. Not super interesting, not a whole lot there as well. And then James Gunn gives a very interesting quote here. He says, quote, "I know what my basic plan is over the next 6 years," Gunn teased, hinting that ultimately there's some form of an Avengers-like future project in store, though he provided no details. That's not... it's not an exact direct quote in this article from James Gunn saying that, but I guess Deadline has some sense of this, or they wouldn't have said it at all, even in paraphrase. So that's interesting. I've said this before when we've talked about the difference between the MCU and the DCU. one of the big things about the DCU, and we'll talk about how other projects in the DCU that were announced have been stalled because of the lack of, clarity on the scripts or just, James Gunn not being satisfied with them. That's great. We want the best products we can get. But I wonder what an Avengers-style crossover looks like, because eventually you have to set that in stone based on the projects that come before it. So I'm very curious to see how he's going to approach that. And then we dive into all the projects here. So we're going to start out with the movies, and then we'll go into the TV shows. First of all, Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow. Gunn and Safran. I'm just going to read directly from the article for a lot of this, because it's pretty short. Little blurbs for each one. So Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow. Gunn and Safran said the Craig Gillespie directed, Millie Alcock starring movie based on Tom King, blah, blah, blah. The comic book is halfway through production. The release date is previously announced, is June 26, 2026. So that's nothing new there. Clayface is up next. So they confirmed James Watkins is in talks to direct, and Mike Flanagan's script, they said solid. Mike Flanagan's script turned in. The goal is to start filming this summer. Said Safran, quote, Clayface isn't widely known as Penguin or Joker, but we think the story is as deeply resonant, thrilling, and even more terrifying. Kind of going with the themes that they've been reporting about how this is going to be kind of a horror-ish kind of movie. The release date, September 11th, 2026, is in the post-Labor Day frame, where Warner Brothers has rallied with genre movies like It, The Nun, and Beetlejuice. So a lot of success there. And interestingly, the pick is set in Hollywood and Gotham. So I think about Clayface these days, and I think about the one in Harley Quinn, who is an aspiring actor, and a pretty terrible one at that, voiced by Alan Tudyk, the very comedic version of that character. But it looks like this one also might be going into Hollywood. I don't know if that's a classic part of the Clayface character. I frankly don't have that much insight. I don't think so. So we'll have to see how much inspiration they take from something like Harley Quinn. We get into the Batman Part 2 now. The Batman 2. Quote, Matt Reeves has yet to turn in a script, but from what Gunn and Safran have read, they love it. Okay, that's really good. Production outlook is end of year 2025. We talked about this previously with Robert Pattinson's comments. The release date is October 1st, 2027, a weekend on which, blah, 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 talking about box office. I still maintain if this film is going to be on track for end of 2025, even December filming, it could probably hit, end of year 2026, early 2027. I feel like if everything goes well, and nothing's been guaranteed with this Batman Part 2. But I feel like if everything does go well, the release date could be pushed up. That's just my hunch. Brave and the Bold. This one is a film that's been through a lot, and it's been kind of confusing of what's going on with Andy Muschietti and all that kind of stuff. So this is what the article says. Quote, Gunn's other universe Batman, separate from the Reeves universe, again, confirmation, Pattinson's Batman is not in the DCU. I've said it before, and I've also said it's not a good idea. You can go check out previous segments. Anyways, remains in development. Andy Muschietti will be the first one to see a script, so he's still on board, said Gunn and Safran. They have a writer, but didn't want to name him. Quote, and this is quote within the quote, as it puts too much pressure on the guy, end quote. Batman Brave and the Bold enters on the Dark Knight and his son Damian Wayne as Robin, who is quite the firecracker. The je ne sais quoi, that's a very interesting phrase to have in this headline article. The je ne sais quoi in this project is that Batman is unaware he has a son. Project is based on Grant Morrison's run of Batman, okay? So it's in development. It's going. That's kind of what we knew. Interesting that they have a mystery writer who I would assume is somebody new. It's, they're not going to get Aaron Sorkin and be like, we don't want him to have too much pressure. I think it's probably a newer writer in the industry, and we'll see where we go from there. Sergeant Rock, we talked about this recently with the exiting of Daniel Craig. Sergeant Rock says, in the wake of Daniel Craig stepping away from the Luca Guadagnino directed World War II movie scripted by Challenger scribe Justin, and I'm going to mispronounce this name, I apologize, I always do, Justin Kritzkis? I believe Justin Kritzkis. Anyways, the DC duo are looking for actors to play the title protagonist. Gunn and Safran said they never met with Craig, and he, quote, was never attached. Quote, doesn't mean that he wasn't being heavily considered for the role. It just probably means what they mean. He just never saw him. Added Safran, what we love about Sergeant Rock is the opportunity to tell a story about heroism and conflict in compelling and unique ways. Justin really wrote a wonderful screenplay, and that's what's catapulted the project to the forefront. The movie will shoot this summer if they can find the right actor. So again, going to the whole, if you can find the right actor, if you can get a script on board, then we'll move into production. Great. That works really well, obviously, with individual movies. Except, again, Sergeant Rock is very disconnected from the main timeline, obviously, because it's World War II. But, for other projects like The Authority, which we'll talk about in just a second, they gave an update on The Authority. How are you going to connect things to eventually make a crossover style film? Are you just going to say whatever's not ready, these characters just aren't going to be in it? That's kind of a bummer, right? But we'll see. Again, I'm not here to rain on their parade or anything like that. I'm looking forward to all these projects. I'm just curious to see what they're going to do. Swamp Thing, quote, the feature which will investigate the dark origins of the mud water creature has 5-time Oscar nominee, 5-time. That's crazy. James Mangold attached, quote, the ball is really in his court. Okay, that's pretty direct. So apparently James Gunn just needs to write the script and that's it. It's going to make it. Okay. Teen Titans, quote, Anna Noguera turned in a draft. Anna Noguera is she is the writer of the Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow movie, which they really like the script for that. So again, she's a first-time writer, I believe, or at least in a major studio project. So there is that. Quote, Anna is working on a script. It's something she was really impassioned about. She turned over an amazing script to us. She's fiddling with it now. It's definitely not a finished script, end quote. Okay. So Teen Titans, not a project I'm particularly excited about, but I'm willing to be surprised, as always. A Matthew Orton screenplay. I think we talked about this a long time ago, but really, we don't know what it is. Quote, the rumor is he's penning a screenplay about Deathstroke and Bane. That's right. That's exactly what we talked about before. The rumors of a Bane and Deathstroke movie. The Deadline article goes on to say neither Gunn or Safran would confirm. Still, they're waiting on Orton's draft. Okay, that's interesting. The Authority. This one's fascinating to me because this was one of the projects that James Gunn talked about first in that original announcement where he was like, yeah, we're going to be doing DC projects, Superman, Supergirl, The Authority. And we have the engineer, right, being coming in Superman. So this is interesting. And the fact that this project, as we'll talk about in just a second, is being delayed or just isn't going along, I think is an interesting thing. So let's read this. Quote, the feature, which was announced 2 years ago, is set to follow a group of anti-heroes who take matters into their own hands despite what governments advise. The Authority was created after Stormwatch, blah, 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 background information. And then, let's see, slow go for the project, but Gunn and Safran still believe in it. I'm continuing the quote a little bit later after the background. Gunn says, quote, it's not the furthest along. At Safran, quote, it's a very big movie. If you're going to do it properly, some of the story elements perhaps that are in Superman, okay, interesting, and some of the other films we fast-tracked set a step a little on the Authority. Gunn further notes, quote, it's the one that got messed with through all of the other things that were happening. The script had a harder time coming along. So again, this is what I'm alluding to, is the fact that, okay, so you're waiting on scripts, and I'm not saying they should have rushed The Authority. I'm not saying that at all. Make the best movie you can within the constraints of your universe, but this is, I think, one of the consequences, and that might be why James Gunn is very hesitant to announce films until they're ready, and that's why Clayface just kind of got announced, and, Sergeant Rock just kind of got announced. And so we'll see where we're going with that. So those are all the movies we got updates for. I believe that's everything that we know about. And so let's move on to TV. Peacemaker, season 2 of the Gunn Penn show is premiering in August. We knew that. Waller, this one's interesting. Quote, the Viola Davis Suicide Squad and Peacemaker spinoff about the espionage director without scruples remains in the works despite a bumpy development road impacted by the strikes. Okay, that's interesting because we haven't really gotten a clear update on the status of something of Waller, and so I think it's interesting that it's still in development. I kind of wondered, is this dead? Is it not going to happen? But it looks like it is going to happen. Okay, Lanterns. Gunn and Safran noted that they could safely say it will premiere in early 2026. That's great. Really excited about Lanterns. The Penguin. Okay, this is interesting. Season 2 is TBD. Quote, there's a lot of moving parts, including Colin Farrell himself, said Safran about the next phase of the hit Max series about the Penguin or the Batman villain. I have almost zero doubt, though, this is going to happen. I mean, it's just so successful. Colin Farrell is winning every single lead actor TV award. It's going to happen. Like Safran's saying, I have no doubt he's being honest about this. Of course, it's going to depend on when Colin Farrell wants to do it because he has leverage now. Or, I mean, not that he didn't have before. He was an Oscar-nominated actor before. Oscar winning? I'm not sure. But, no, he has all the leverage, and so I'm sure it'll happen eventually. Paradise Lost, another project that we just haven't heard much about. Quote, the Max live-action series which Safran built as Game of Thrones-ish story about the Mascara, the home of the Amazons, and the birthplace of Wonder Woman is still in the works. No writer has been announced. This one looks like it's on the back burner. Booster Gold, another series that's been on the back burner. Quote, the series follows a loser from the future who uses future technology to come back to today and pretends to be a superhero. That's just context. Updates, Safran, we love Booster Gold. This is a quote. There was a particular showrunner/creator we were waiting on who expressed interest. We waited a really long time. Ultimately, he fell out of love. We pivoted. It's still one that's important to us. It's moving forward with somebody else. That's really interesting. Because the speculation now is, who is it? Like, was it actually someone like Aaron Sorkin that they got to write the script and then he was like, nope, I'm out? That's really interesting. I'd be very curious, to someday know who originally was attached to Booster Gold and who had to drop. That's very interesting. Again, a lot of these projects, it's like, we'll get them eventually, but just got to get on pace, right? And the final one here is also a very interesting one. the Blue Beetle animated series. Quote, Deadline's Rosie Cordero first told you about this, and Safran says that the project from the director Soto, who directed the original Blue Beetle movie, and the writer of the original Blue Beetle movie is quote, getting to a place, and they're going to present for a green light release soon. It follows on the events of that movie. Okay, so again, we knew that Jolomar Dueño was going to be coming back as Jaime Reyes, as Blue Beetle, but what we really didn't have a lot of clarity on was what were the events of that Blue Beetle film going to do in terms of impacting the DCU, and it looks like that's another vestige that they wanted to carry over. I'm of two minds of this, not just because I don't love that Blue Beetle movie, because again, I as another example, as a counterexample, I love Peacemaker, right? Love Peacemaker season 1, I love the Suicide Squad. I don't love the whole let's just pick and choose what we want to carry over. Like, okay, so I get that you wanted to make your own Superman and whatever, your own Batman, you don't want Ben Affleck, but like picking and choosing, like what's the deal here, you know? Why do we do it for some and not the others? I'm a little confused. I'm just a little confused about this. I don't know if it's going to confuse other people, because frankly, right? I mean, I guess making it animated makes it a little bit better because it's not like another direct sequel movie, to it, but it's a little weird to me because those projects have the stain of the DCEU still on them, and so I don't know exactly what's going on in that regard. But guys, that was a lot. Those were a lot of updates on projects for the DCEU. I think there's a lot to look forward to, but and again, they have an ambitious slate. It's something like 2 live-action movies, an animated movie, 2 live-action series, and 2 animated series every single year. At some point, that's a lot of content. I mean, you thought the MCU was a lot of content. This is more, almost. Maybe not right now, although the MCU is kind of being put into overdrive because of the strikes and whatnot, but this is a lot. And so I'm just going to be very curious to see how James Gunn is able to handle all of this and where he goes from here. Because again, I think that there is a lot that we just don't know yet about the future projects, and James Gunn has admitted that himself. So guys, what do you think about these updates to the DCU? Are you excited about it, or are you a little bit nervous? Maybe a little bit of both, like myself. Let me know in the comments down below. And with that, that'll wrap up episode number 67 of the Access Blockbusters pod. We are 2/3 of the way to 100, so we're getting there. Once we restarted the podcast, I think in August or so, we really started in full force every single week, and that was around episode 40, I want to say. So we're really getting up there in terms of, getting close to 100. So hopefully we'll get there, and maybe we'll do a special live stream or something like that. But anyways, guys, thank you so much for listening. As always, if you're watching or listening on YouTube, make sure to subscribe, give this video a like, and if you're listening on the audio platforms, make sure to rate on there as well. That'll do it for me from the Access Blockbusters pod, from the Access Blockbusters YouTube channel, and I will see you guys in the next one.